wouldn't say requests, our demands all the time. I know you've got a very, very heavy responsibilities at the moment, and all of our requests have been instantly dealt with, and it is so gratifying to see the head of an institution under inquiry being so open, and we really want to thank you very much for that.
Appreciate that, Judge.
Do you affirm the evidence you give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Say, I do.
I do.
Morning, Mr. Kingon. I'd like to repeat the thanks from the side of the advocates. And just to add to what the judge has said, the liaison team that you've given us has been indispensable to our work. We wouldn't have been able to do it at speed and at all, in fact, without their help. So thank you.
Thank you, Advocate.
Why don't you kick off, Mr. Kingon?
Firstly, Judge, to the panelists, the evidence leaders, thank you for the privilege of being here today. Nervous privilege, I may say, Judge, and obviously in preparation one doesn't know what to anticipate in terms of this, but thank you very much, and I will say a bit later in terms of thanks to you with regards to the work that has been done in terms of the thing. You said we've been instantaneous in responding. I've attempted to do that, Judge. I think not always have I been. It's put me under pressure, let's put it that way, but it's for the good of the country and for the good of the organisation. And for us, that's the most important as we kick off here. But thank you, Judge. If I may kick off, I was obviously appointed to the post of Acting Commissioner on the 19th of March, exactly 7 months today. In the evening of the 19th of March, I was appointed to a 90-day tenure by the Minister of Finance, and it's been repeated twice subsequently. And my next acting tenure ends if I've got it right, on the 13th of December 2018. Obviously, I was parachuted into this position, and I think it's important that on the 14th of March that I had been appointed as the acting head of business and individual tax on the resignation of Mr. Jonas Makwakwa. It was a Wednesday. On the evening of the 19th, which was a Monday, I got the call, am I prepared to act? And I might say I didn't say yes immediately, Judge, but it was 5 days that I was in that position, and obviously then I was asked to serve in this. I think you would acknowledge that that propelled me into a very awkward situation. Having people who were senior to me reporting to me, it does make it difficult. In addition, I had to cooperate with your commission, which was kicking off at that point in time, and ensure that the organisation continues with its operations and revenue. We had to balance these two things. Whether we got it right is a debatable issue, and we can get to that. We also faced the issue that we've got severe cuts in terms of our budget, and that gave other aspects that we need to deal with, and we may touch on those a little later. To top it all, SARS was involved in a number of non-core litigation, as I would call it, non-core disputes that really were distracting to our organisation. The so-called alleged rogue unit had really taken a lot of time in terms of the management of the organisation. Just prior to my appointment, the budget in February, and really we were being blamed with regards to the VAT increase, that we were 50 billion short in terms of the printed estimate that was published in the prior budget. We obviously did not reach at the end of March, just after I was appointed, we did not reach the revenue target, as you are aware. We were fighting with the Auditor General, amongst others, which I'll touch on a bit later. And there was many disputes about certain crimes or alleged crimes that had been committed, whether there was cover-up or not, and I'm not going to go and dwell on that now, but this is the context to which we came. Judge, we were previously in the media for the right reasons. We would be in the media for operational issues. And I'm happy to be in the media when refunds don't flow or something like that. Obviously, we don't want service failures, but that's our business. It's about service. But to be in the media for non-issues, non-core issues, that was the huge challenge. And I think it's very important to say, really, if ever had SARS had to contend with weak leadership, blemished integrity, total public distrust of our organization, serious operational lapses and breaches of the higher purpose, I don't think we've ever experienced in my history of being in this organization a moment like we are in today. And I hope in my tenure here, whatever capacity that might be, I'll remain to serve. I hope we never have to face this again. It is a first for us. Having our credibility and our effectiveness under question in the public domain is severely damaging, not only to the country, but to our organization, our staff, many of who are represented here. I was obviously daunted by all of this coming in, and I had to find the strength to keep SARS going for the sake of this beloved country of ours. That meant that I had no option but to work with SARS to ensure that we had stability in terms of the organization. I think it would be true to say that the situation continues to be uncertain, tumultuous, and I think you've seen the suspension of the Commissioner, Mr. Tom Moyane. It has capped a period since 2014 where all these different narratives have played out in the media. It's extremely tumultuous. It's the 4 years that I think have aged me the most in terms of who I am. And there's many people here, if I may say, both current and past SARS people who've had to contend with job displacements, retrenchments, resignations and dismissals, triggered by findings and recommendations of various investigations, such as the Skikikani report and the KPMG report. And I want to pause a while there, if I may, Judge. And just to say, for an organization to allow a release of the Skikikani report into the public domain, which ultimately damaged people to the extent that I've seen damage in people, to release taxpayer details in the Skikikani report and issue a press release without thinking twice that this is in conflict with the principles of confidentiality, it's a shame. And I'm deeply perturbed by it. The damage it's caused is huge. Obviously, the implementation of the new operating model on top of that compounded things, and I don't want to elaborate on that today necessarily in absolute detail, because you've heard much evidence in the last few months with regards to that. These things combine to have damaged SARS's reputation and wrecked personal lives. And there's people's personal lives that have been wrecked here. Careers, reputations have been directly impacted on of our staff. And it's not judged that it's only the people who were displaced from jobs who were impacted. There are many people sitting in this room, and I know there are, who got posts, who got positions in terms of the operating model. They also felt the hurt and the pain. And there are many examples of that that I could share with the Commission. But this had the result of sowing uncertainty and division and creating a serious climate of fear and distrust in our organization. I've mentioned the litigation a little earlier that we were embroiled. This is on top of all of this. And you know, for me to be litigating against the Auditor General on the one side, and then my boss, the Minister of Finance, it's unheard of. And it really goes contrary to the flow of what we would like to be about. And these things are just not acceptable. I've resolved all of the cases that are out there that were non-core. They have been resolved. There's some aspects just cleaning up in terms of that, but that will continue. We have to get into our focus of restoration of our organization and resume our place as a tax authority that is robust, is trusted, in some cases feared, I think one would have to say, but for the most place trusted. Because if we trust it, revenue collection will flow. And I believe that we have to do this for the sake of our country. I do remain, even as I sit here today, very concerned about the overall health of our organization. And it's a thing that for many nights has kept me worried. How do we fix this? How do we fix this key issue? And just some of the concerns that I just wanted to touch on. When I came in, we were faced that we had 3 chief officers' positions vacant. So we've got the chief officer of business and individual tax. We've got the chief officer of customs, who had recently resigned. We had an acting chief officer within the finance space, where the chief officer of finance had resigned in August of last year. To have 3 key positions vacant in that way is serious for the organization. I have filled, obviously, the positions of business and individual tax and customs with acting positions now. And we're waiting just to see how we proceed in that regard. And I have appointed the Chief Officer of Finance, who testified earlier this week. I did that with the concurrence of the Minister, who I am accountable to for such matters. It would be true that our executive leadership is broken and unstable and racked by division and distrust. We need visionary leadership at this time. And I don't think at this time we have such visionary leadership to take the organization to the next step in our going forward. We have to fix this place. And for me, it's so critical. We need vision. And just in thinking about in preparation for here, there's a statement, and forgive me, I don't know who said it, but an organization that has no vision dies. We need vision to take this place forward. I need to also acknowledge, Judge, that there are cases that we've been in denial that there's a problem. And that the first part of healing is accept that there's a problem, and then we can move forward in terms of going forward. Very importantly, and it's been a fascinating journey for me as I've come into the office and I've had the opportunity to go through lots of documents, and I've made many of them available to you. But management has been disempowered in terms of the availability of information. A lot of information was kept in an inner clique within the organization. Now, I'll give an example. The Bain report and the diagnostics was not openly shared with everybody. So you couldn't make judgment calls. You get told this is the direction. You get the Gartner report, which is so fundamental to the organization. That is not shared as openly as it should. We then say in the Gartner report, no, there's a can of worms that's been uncovered in terms of the Gartner report. I'm not sure. I haven't seen that. I have not seen that evidence that shows there's a can of worms, and I think it may have even been stated in this very room. We then go on an escapade, and we appoint Grant Thornton, which the Chief Officer of Finance alluded to. The report of Grant Thornton comes back to us in a PowerPoint presentation, which for me is not a forensic audit, with due respect. And if I look at that, it's all ifs and buts and disclaimers. But that report is also not shared with management to empower them. And you've got to wonder, if I do a report, why am I getting a report? Is it to keep in a closet? And I just suspect, if I may, I think there was a lot of maliciousness in it, because it was targeted at certain individuals. Let's find evidence that can sink people. And there's a lesson I've learned, and I'm jumping away from my script that I have. There's a lesson in this. Dwell more in the future than in the past. Because the past, yes, it's happened. But let's look to the future. We know the things that are broken. Let's fix them. I think just an example of the withholding of information that the evidence leaders led evidence a few weeks ago when Minister Gigaba was here was the aspect of the so-called Russian trip that took place in November or December. I can't remember the exact date now for a second. My mind went blank there. But no one in our leadership team knew about that trip. I sent a letter to the Commission on the 21st of August. I sent a reminder on the 28th of August. I'm still none the wiser. As I sit here, I do not know. So that's just some of the information. Normally, if I was to go, for instance, I hate traveling, but I went to Ghana. I don't hide it from my people. My people know where I am. I've got to appoint an acting person. They need to know where I am, what I'm going there for. I need to be accountable. The point of commissioner, and I'll get to that at the end, Judge, has to be accountable. And we have to be accountable for doing the right thing. Very importantly, these aspects, these disturbing aspects at the top, permeated to all levels in the organization and obviously created a fertile breeding ground for destructive gossip, fear and distrust, which even continues today. I need to say that this was compounded by certain arbitrary and unsympathetic HR processes, cases of frivolous and mischievous internal investigations. And it's an area I'll come back to a little later. Employee morale has been impacted very negatively. Even yesterday afternoon, I sat with the IT team. The impact on the staff morale is severe. That's what I'm trying to do. And it's one step at a time. We need to fix these things.
Mr. Kingon, can I pause for a moment? The role of HR and employer relations, I just have a couple of specific questions for you there.
Sure.
You brought to our attention not long ago an application from Mr. Labello, who's the Group Executive of Employer Relations, to Ms. Rafilwe Mokwena, who is now the suspended CO Legal. An application made on the 9th of July this year for external legal services. And that resulted in work being done by Mr. Mapakela of Mashiana Mudli Monama to the tune of in excess of 759,000 rand in 1 month. And that work was to prepare Mr. Labello to give evidence before this commission. I want to know if you authorized that.
I did not authorize that. I think maybe if I could, Judge, just highlight how the process works. So I would not normally get involved in the approval of legal costs. That is the domain of the Chief Legal Officer, insofar as it relates to matters outside the labor relations space. In other words, there was a delegation in place up to a point, and forgive me with regards to the dates, that would have allowed employee relations. So if they're entering a CCMA matter or labor court matter, they would be able to employ lawyers in terms of that. But there's two things I want to say, if I may, Judge. That people who've appeared before you. They went through our corporate legal team, Ms. Makungu Matabula, and I specifically put that in place. If anybody needed, they needed to get approval and go through that. That was not done in this case, and I was not aware of these costs being incurred.
Do you think it's appropriate?
No.
Is it worthy of a disciplinary?
I have not engaged Mr. Labella on this specific matter, and I think I would owe it to him to do that first. If I look at the extent of the costs involved and where I am in my current climate of my organization, our organization, maybe I should be saying, I can't afford costs like this, and to be charged 750,000 including VAT, actually a bit more than that, for 1 month's work and not full-time work. There's something wrong.
Well,
Do you know the nature of the work that was done?
Only, I have not seen the brief. I've only read the invoice, and I have to assume from that that the work related to preparation of the evidence that he led here with regards to Mr. Pillay. I think I saw Mr. Rich's matter there, Mr. Lakay's matter, I think Johan von Lochrenberg's matter. There might have been one or two others. Forgive me, but I've got the matters here. But yeah,
It seems to be, the instruction seems to be Mr. Labello asking Mr. Mapakela to gather documents around the rogue unit saga and to prepare files, which he did. I must say, Mr. Kingon, that we are particularly disturbed because Mr. Labello repeatedly said in his evidence that the reason he wanted to give evidence was to clear his own name. So it seems to us that an amount of 759,000 rand of taxpayer money was spent in an attempt to help him clear his own name. This commission, the judge has said repeatedly, we accept that there was legal advice before him which justified the disciplinary action that he took. And it really does baffle us why this amount of money had to be spent.
I think it's unnecessary, and it warrants a further investigation to lead to a conclusion, whatever that conclusion might be in terms of our due process. It's unacceptable, Judge.
I have a second question.
Maybe before you move on the first one, I just need clarity.
Go ahead, Mr. Kachler.
I understood you, Mr. Kingon, to suggest that the chief officer legal had authority to approve the application. Did I understand you right?
Correct.
So there's no question around the authority having been given by the right person.
No question.
The question is, the point as I understand it is around the wisdom exercise of any by the one granting the request. Well, the authority always lay with Ms. Mokwena. Whether or not she exercised that authority rightly, that's a different matter.
Correct. The key thing, sir, is that in any briefing to legal teams, you need a brief. I haven't seen that brief. So I'm not sure what was put before them to say this is the advice that we're needing or not needing. I haven't seen that. I've only seen. So before any approval is granted, you need to understand the scope of the approval that you're going to grant, surely. Because it can't be a blank check to say I can incur millions of rand just to go in a certain direction. And again, it's backward looking instead of looking to the future.
Could you also then clarify you've indicated that you approved a process for individuals within SARS seeking legal advice for coming before the commission to be cleared through corporate legal services.
Correct.
What was envisaged by that?
Well, what happened is there were certain people who were approached by the commission to lead evidence, and they just sought some legal advice in terms of how to present it, etc. It was just if they needed it, and there were 2 or 3 people that specifically asked, and we felt it right to do so.
Why would the matter in relation to Mr. Libello not fall under that category of approval?
That I can't answer before I do further investigation.
And I suppose I've sort of noted you to suggest you think that one was improper, and I'm just trying to see how would you distinguish that from the sanction you had given in relation to the others?
Yeah. I don't know quite how to answer you because I don't know the facts as to how it happened. That they gave the approval for the 750,000 to be incurred. And I need to go into that in a lot more detail, which I haven't been able to do as yet. But the process of getting that approval was known. In fact, Mr. Labello, prior to appearing at the one stage, actually approached and he sought advice. I said, well, have you got legal help? And he said no, which I assumed was the correct position. And he actually did seek by writing to the head of corporate legal to get such approval. He didn't utilize it as such at that point in time.
Well, they're two very separate things, and that is you hire an attorney or counsel to come and sit here and to assist you if you get into any difficulty as you're giving evidence. Maybe there's a question asked that would incriminate you, and your counsel would say that he shouldn't answer that question or whatever. That's that. It doesn't cost 750,000 rand for someone to sit and do that. Do you have the letter that was written? I remember a letter that was written to me. It was a very different case here. This was a matter, and I'll tell you now because I received the letter. They CC'd, as they were talking to each other, they kept CCing me, and I would like to know why they felt it was necessary to do so, but be that as it may. In which this exercise was go and gather all the evidence we had against Mr. Pillay, Mr. Richer, Logerenberg, etc., at that time 4 years ago when we were about to discipline them. Gather all the evidence we have to show what we had, to show what evidence we had. There's a long letter from Mr. Mapakela there analyzing that and showing why he said they were all guilty. Now that's a very different matter from having someone to sit here to protect you as a witness.
Fully agree.
That might cost, well, I don't know if it costs 750,000 rand, particularly as your brief is only to gather the documents you had. It would seem to me it would take a day to do that. But be that as it may, Mr. Mapakela and Mr. Lebella are coming next week. They've been summoned to come and explain that. But just to assist you, they're two very different briefs you're talking about.
Could I just add to that, Judge? Counsel, is that one for the past or for his appearance on Monday? That account?
I'll tell you, if I may say so, if I may intervene. It is to prepare him, to prepare the evidence he should give to us, i.e. gather together the evidence he should give to us on the whole rogue unit and why it was justified to pursue these people. That was the purpose, according to the letter. Have you got that letter?
I was going to turn to that next, if you
Anyway,
don't mind.
Mr. Kingon, I may say so, you can investigate as much you like, but spending R750,000 rand of taxpayers' money for that purpose, to resurrect the rogue unit and to resurrect evidence against these people of 4 years ago, is to my mind outrageous.
I would concur, Judge.
Mr. Kingon, I sent you this letter a couple of days ago, and the reason I sent it to you was I wanted to ask you whether this was a letter that represented the views of SARS. And I'd like to point to a couple of paragraphs which are disturbing to the Commission. It's an 11-page letter. It was written on the 22nd of August, 2018. So if I may say, the cost, whatever this letter cost Mr. Mapakela to write, is not included in the 759,000 rand because it's from another month. So 759,000 is the minimum. I've seen another invoice for 65,000 from another month. So frankly, we're approaching on R1 million for Mr. Lebella's appearance here in order to reawake the rogue unit issue. Now, this letter, as the judge said, is actually a letter from Mr. Mapakela to Mr. Lebella, but it CC'd the judge. And it followed a meeting or two that the judge and Mr. Lebella had.
The rogue unit, discussing what Mr. Lebella wanted to come and say to this commission, and he wanted to come and say to the commission, he said, I want to go and justify why we pursued these people. And
Now,
that's,
yes,
if I may say so, because
they were your meetings.
these
Yes.
were my conversations.
Now, most
By
of
the way, I said you're welcome to come and appear before the commission. It's been said at that time particularly that this commission was blocking things and so forth. I said, Mr. Lebella, if you want to come and talk to the commission, you do so. It doesn't mean that he's going to have a platform here, and that's not what this commission is about. and we will see what it is he wishes to tell the Commission. If it is of value to the Commission, we will hear it, and if it is of no value to the Commission, we will not hear it.
Now, the first 9 pages of the letter set out why, in Mr. Mapakela's opinion, Mr. Pillay, Mr. Richer, etc., were all guilty at the time. The last page or two, paragraph 24 is headed, "The importance of a public rebuttal by the SARS." That's by the SARS, and this is why I put the questions that are coming to you, Mr. Acting Commissioner. And Mr. Mapakela says, Mr. Pillay has been granted an opportunity by the Commission to tell South Africans and the entire global community that he had been purged out of the SARS and that the unit was lawfully established and that this unit did not engage in any unlawful activities. In this regard, it's critical that the SARS human resource is given an opportunity to provide the SARS's version of events around 2014. Particularly as to what led to the initiation of disciplinary proceedings against Mr. Pillay, including his suspension. There is no reason why the SARS HR should not be given a platform. It is important that the Commission does not only allege to be fair, but that it seem to be fair, especially after it's given Mr. Pillay an opportunity to state his version of events. It goes on to say, same with Mr. Ravelli. The next paragraph is, the new but yet puzzling position adopted by the Commission not to deal with the allegations surrounding the unit are disappointing, given that other people, such as Mr. Pillay, were granted an opportunity to state their version of events in respect of this unit, and there is no indication that the evidence is to be ignored, given the Commission's change in direction. And he concludes by saying, almost concludes, in my view, if the SARS HR is not given the opportunity to be heard in an open and public forum, like the one afforded to Mr. Pillay, it would confirm my reasonable suspicion that the Commission has already made up its mind in finding that Mr. Pillay was purged out of the SARS, particularly that the Commission has now decided to avoid the allegations around the unit. My reasonable suspicion is based on the ongoing lobbying to bring Mr. Pillay back into the SARS, and this would be possible if the Commission was to make a finding that Mr. Pillay was purged from the SARS and that there was no prima facie case against him prior to his resignation from the SARS. It appears that this is likely to be the conclusion given by the Commission's glaring outlook to ignore existing prima facie evidence against Mr. Pillay as submitted to the Commission by Mr. Labello. In my humble observation, the Commission is reluctant to accept any evidentially material that goes against its preconceived finding, which is motivated by the dominant but incorrect narrative that Mr. Pillay was purged. And he says he remains available to the Commission. We have summoned him, and we appreciate that he's available. Now, you'll appreciate, Mr. Kingon, that Mr. Mapakela is accusing this Commission of bias. And I ask you, is that SARS's position about this Commission?
Not at all. And if anything, I fully, firstly, this does not represent, and I've got highlighted those exact paragraphs you've read. This is contrary to reflecting anything of SARS. This is definitely not my view. It is not SARS's view. There's no way that I believe that this Commission is biased in any way. I wouldn't have supported it otherwise. We've got to put all evidence before you. You will make up your mind. I trust this Commission wholeheartedly, and I believe that you will make it up, your minds up, after you've heard all the evidence. This letter saddens me because it purports to represent me, ultimately, because I'm the accounting officer. And to do that is unacceptable. And I distance myself from this letter.
And then a follow-up question. This so-called rogue unit, probably about 6 people, it was disbanded years ago. Is it a priority of yours to continue to investigate what happened?
Not at all. The rogue unit is history. Judge. The rogue unit, there's a whole narrative, there's information that has been provided. Yes, there may have been elements in it that operated in a way that I wouldn't feel comfortable with today. But we need to move on. We can't be dwelling in the past. This is now 4 years on. We can't keep on dredging this up and dredging this up. How are we ever going to get to a place that we can move forward? So it is not my intention to go dig into the rogue unit. And in the way it was dug in, and I want to pause there a while, the way we dug into that rogue unit, there's a person sitting in the audience here who will remain nameless. The one thing he asked of me, one thing, just give my parents a letter. I get emotional. Forgive me. That I wasn't involved in a brothel. People, this is not how we treat people. We can't.
Don't worry, Mr. Kingon, I've been driven to tears at times by what I hear here.
As
Was
I-
follow up.
Sure.
Was there ever an impression within SARS, I'm talking now since the commission had started its work, that there were matters that were considered relevant to the terms of reference of the commission that the commission was not willing to hear?
I've had no such view. No.
Was it ever raised with you that there may be an impression, at least from HR, that
No.
the commission may not be open to hearing any other side of the story in relation to the termination of those
No.
individuals?
Nothing prevented any evidence from being provided to the Commission, and you've shown you to be open in every way to anything that we've brought. So no.
Yes, well, I can just say on that council will correct me. I don't know of one person who has come and said, I want to give evidence, who has not been permitted that, including Mr. Labella. Has anyone approached us and said, I want to give evidence, and we've said, no, you can't? There was the one man who wanted to come and give defamatory evidence, and we said, well, what is the basis? And he said he didn't have a basis.
Well, he didn't want to give the evidence. He wanted me to give the evidence.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Can I?
Please go on.
Anyway,
Yeah.
I just want to just clear that up. We are asked in one of our terms of reference, were people, I think the word was coerced out of the organisation? Well, we'll look at that and decide that. And I think that it does start at the beginning of end of 2014, when people started to be resigning, etc. And one wants to know why they resigned. So that, to that extent. Do you know anything about, I read in that letter, a campaign of some kind, there's lobbying of some kind for Mr. Pillay to come back here? Have you ever heard of anything of this?
There's always been rumours, Judge, of many things. You've got to just sift out what's true and what's not true. But that's not the focus at the moment.
No, I understand that. I'm just getting a bit, not concerned, I'm just getting fascinated by this obsession with Mr. Pillay. Do you know why there's such an obsession with Mr. Pillay?
I have got no idea. I worked for Mr. Pillay, and I've got nothing but respect for the man. And I've got no idea what the obsession's about. But Judge, these obsessions must move off the...
Well, you say so, Mr. Kingon, and maybe you're right, but I've also got to decide whether we should move on or whether we should have a rogue unit hearings.
Yeah, sure.
But I'm just fascinated. I've never met Mr. Pillay. I don't know him. I don't know any of these people. But I'm just hearing of R750,000. I live a very modest life, if I may say so. To me, R750,000 is a lot of money. And what is that? To pursue Mr. Pillay, pursue Mr. Richer, pursue Mr. von Logrenberg or whatever? I'm quite serious. Can you tell me, can you give me some insight into what on earth is going on?
I don't know, Judge. But you know what scares me, Judge, is that money, and my Chief Officer of Finance is here, could have been used to employ 2 people on my front lines.
No. Now, if you just look back again, I'm just trying to calculate how much money was spent at the beginning? 24 million rand to trawl through papers to see if we can find something on Mr. Pillay or even Mr. Cazzel's name gets put up there without even knowing. And we know very well, I've seen the records, Mr. Cazzel's affairs were being dealt with in the ordinary course by his tax advisor. $750,000, I don't know how much in legal fees went into that. Inquiry after inquiry, how much did that cost? You must be up to 40 million rand that is being spent to investigate of it. I mean, it may be true, it may well be that there were, amongst these 6 men, that they were doing things that are illegal. Perhaps, how long, does it cost 40 million rand to find that?
Well, some of it's been refunded by one of the firms, so it is less now, but it goes in also to the IT contracts, and forgive me, I haven't got the figures at my fingertips with regards to what we spent on Grant Thornton.
12 million.
12 million, it's another 12 million, so it all adds up.
But I mean, people are spending money hell like water.
Sorry, Mr. King.
And I'm about to put in my tax return, by the way.
Mr. Kingon, are any of these matters discussed at EXCO?
We have had discussions with regards to some of them, the matters. Yeah, some of them.
Anyway, we can move off that. We can see if anyone, I've said how many times I've said here, if anybody wants to give evidence in contradiction to any evidence you've heard, please come forward. It is now 6 weeks away from having to finalize this matter. I've said it so many times. 14th of August was the date for, you've got to have a set cut-off date sometime. 14th of August was the date. We've had nothing to contradict any of the evidence we've heard here. I received 2 affidavits yesterday in relation to one point about what Mr. Skeepers said. I will see them, I've arranged to see them this afternoon to see if they want to give evidence. If anyone has got any evidence that they want to produce on anything that is relevant to this commission, this is your last chance.
Please go on, Mr. Kingon.
Pick up where I was.
Sorry, Mr. Kingon, I just thought that you might, you're an insider here. I come from the outside and I just hear these things.
No, sure.
Thank you very much. Will you carry on? It's
Thank you.
much more inspiring to hearing what you say.
I just have one question, Council, with regard to the legal costs. Was Ms. Mokwena aware of the instruction that we issued in respect of these matters?
I'm not too sure of the dates, Advocate. So I'm not too sure. I would have to check. I wouldn't, it would be remiss of me to say something I don't know as I sit here. It might have been post, I'm not sure. Okay, just picking up, I was dealing with regards to the permeation into the broader organization of this fear, doubt, etc. And I think you are aware of our employee connection survey, which we conducted for 2017, which for the first time that in the history of doing it, that we found a drop. Now that is indicative of something.
A drop of?
The drop of what we call employee engagement. And it measures multiple different, it's a separate, and I think the Chief Officer of Finance alluded to it. It's a drop-off from previous years. So there's different criteria that are measured. Staff fill in various surveys that we do annually. So that was indicative of something. But the one thing I just wanted to highlight, and it comes down to fear and distrust. If you go into our environments, yes, in this day and age, we've got to have good security. It's a fact. But you go into our environment at Lahai, you'll find cameras wherever you look. And Judge, someday I'll take you there and point them out. I've got two cameras I can see from my desk outside my office. And that fear and distrust that was instilled in terms of all these cameras that were all over the place. In addition, at the entrance to A Block at Lahai, which is our main campus, the building that we own, we had an additional scanner put in and an additional baggage scanner put in, which was the only block that had it. I removed those because it gives a perception that leadership is disengaged from the staff. And I'll never forget, Judge, on the day that I removed it, there was a staff member, I don't know who it was, I was told about it, who basically did a dance in front of that thing being removed. And it's all perspectives that we try and create, that we are different. We are part of it. I'm part of this team. And we are playing on the same field. We need to be part of that team. In
Sorry,
addition,
Mr. Kingon, I want to whose instructions were those cameras installed by?
well, obviously security, probably, but it's a question of fear and distrust that kind. Another example, now, just two
There's a
examples.
Post-Security Act on instructions as well.
And I haven't gone into all the details of it. I'm trying to get on the business of revenue collecting, and these are side issues. On my actual office door, I've got a fingerprint scanner to open the door. Is that normal?
I've heard evidence from a man, he can't even have a smoke here with someone listening to him.
Well,
He said, Mr. Kingon, it's worth some light relief that the staff used to put sticky tape over the cameras when they had a smoke.
and I probably know the person that probably said it to you. But look, security is needed in this day and age. But the fact that we have more security entering our A block, which is where our executive sits, compared to our E and F block, where our IT infrastructure sits, worries me. Just think about it. What is our business? Our business here is serving the client, and I'll get to that just now. But our key underlying, that undergirds everything we do, is our ICT infrastructure. But I've got less security there than to come see me. Something wrong. And it's a matter of perspective.
Anyway, I'm sure there are bigger things as well that you want to tell us about.
No, sure.
Perhaps
But
let's get to the,
it goes
start
to
getting
the
to the big thing.
Obviously, one of the other areas was the IT environment that we had created over a number of years, and I had the pleasure of being part of and working with Mr. Hoare for him, sometimes not always agreeing with him, but that's a separate matter. We're allowed to disagree. But the IT infrastructure has deteriorated through neglect over 4.5 years. Much evidence has been laid here, but I do think I need to pause and, Judge, you did emphasize to the public yesterday, and I did issue a press statement as well. Our e-filing system is not about to collapse tomorrow. But if we don't do something, we're going to get there. And I don't want to get into all the technicalities, but the IT infrastructure is important, that it be maintained, refreshed, maybe 20% per year, maybe 25%. We're about 40% behind, depending who you take the actual figures from. And we are going to do that. In fact, the key steps we've already approved as an executive with regards to, and I'm not going to get into the technicalities, HTML5 and lots of other things in terms of the IT space. And I'm so looking forward to moving forward in this environment. Next year, Judge, we're going to auto-assess 1.6 million taxpayers, that they don't even have to come to our branch. Now, that's a fundamental shift in the way we're doing our business. And those are the things that we need to be doing. And it again comes, and our IT people need to be passionate again about doing the right things in terms of this. The ill-considered decision to stop at the end of 2014, the modernization journey, was a sad moment, and in fact has put us back 4.5 years. And it might be more, because we've got to catch up now. It might have put us back further. And that is deeply worrisome, and something we need to deal with. An area that has been of concern to me, Judge, has been the issue of confidentiality of information. Leaks within our organization were very rare. It wasn't something that we grew up knowing that taxpayer information would be leaking. Or SARS confidential information. You know the tax administration's got the two, Tax Administration Act's got the two types of information. The leaks is a total departure from the culture and values that we held dear to over many years. Scarily, I'm not surprised anymore to find details of my discussions with top management in the media the next day. And it is so sad that we've got to that point, and I've been asking the question of myself, why? What is causing people to want to leak? Now, some of it could be malicious. In other words, I want to undermine the leadership. Some of it might be just simple distrust in leadership over the period that we've had the hurt and pain. Those questions I'm asking myself, but very importantly, we have to restore integrity and trust amongst ourselves. Judge, if you would allow me to read the next piece, because I don't want to deviate from what I've written in terms of this. All of these things that I've highlighted may be overwhelming. However, the Commission of Inquiry is a watershed moment in SARS's history. It has the possibility of opening a new chapter for SARS. The upheavals of the past 4 years and the ramifications thereof will take time to heal and be fixed. As a first step, leadership must stand up and take accountability, both individually, which I'm doing here, and collectively for the damage done. And I'd like to read this, which is an unreserved apology. I would therefore like to unreservedly say sorry on behalf of the SARS leadership to our taxpayers, our many stakeholders, including the President of the country, the Minister of Finance, as well as the Deputy Minister of Finance, government as a whole, our former and current staff members and their families, and the citizens of our country.
You just take a breath.
Take your
that's all
time,
you do.
Mr. Kingon.
For falling short of the high standards of performance we have always set for ourselves, for not living up to the SARS values and higher purpose, the poor communication, the unfair treatment, and the fear and pain in which staff members may have been subjected. Judge, I give that apology unreservedly.
Thank you, Mr. Kingon. Take your time, Mr. Kingon.
One is passionate for the organization. Forgive me.
We so appreciate it. As a citizen, I appreciate it.
Restoring ethical leadership. The success of SARS was built on quality and stability of leadership. If you look back, and huge stability. For instance, we had the same Minister of Finance over 11 years of the 21 years of existence. Now, it's an interesting thing, Judge, just sitting here last night in preparation, 21, we've come to being an adult, 21 years in October. And it's probably significant that today, 7 months since I was appointed, 21 years this month since SARS came into existence. And the issue that we need to look at is both the quality and stability of leadership. Many past SARS leaders have demonstrated unwavering ethical leadership and commitment to the higher purpose of effectively and efficiently administering and collecting taxes in order to provide the funds needed for government. And we speak of this higher purpose and people frown on us. But I truly believe, and I know my colleagues truly believe, that in collecting money and dealing with service, it's not about the money in the bank. It is about the orphan who can have a foster care on the table. It's about the person who's been impacted by the scourge of HIV and AIDS, who can have antiretrovirals provided monthly. It's about the school children who can be provided an education. It's not about the money, it's about that. It's about the ability to take the country forward. This quality and stability of leadership enabled SARS to plan for long-term changes. And very importantly, I think we've seen in the IT space, and we have discussed even by the Chief Officer of Finance, you have to have long-term planning in the organization to enable us to plan and develop properly. It allows us to implement systems changes. It allows us to encourage and embed a credible culture. Above all, it allows SARS to make mistakes. And yes, we do make mistakes. I'll be the first to acknowledge I have made mistakes. But at least we can grow out of those mistakes. much emphasis in our organization has been placed on formal qualifications as being the main, the only aspect of successful leadership. For me, and maybe I'm defending myself, I do believe that technical mastery derived by experience in the organization is paramount to ensure that we can properly manage taxes. And it's an important aspect for me. But the most important, and it comes down to everything we've been hearing before the Commission, is the issue of integrity. That is the most important aspect that we need in leadership. We need leadership of absolute integrity, uprightness, honesty. We're going to make mistakes. But if your purpose is to get there, that's what we want. And the job of SARS's leadership is primarily about creating a culture, setting the tone from the top. In other words, live it, and people will follow it. Embedding and living the values. And very importantly, just as I've done a moment ago, leadership needs to acknowledge when they make mistakes. And if we all make mistakes, Judge, it's a fact. But be man enough to stand up and take accountability for the mistakes. Be humble enough to learn from those mistakes and move on. People make mistakes, and it's a question of how we deal with it. SARS leadership needs to take accountability both individually and collectively. Obviously, we need to embed governance and maintain open and honest communication in order to build confidence. Communication with our staff, communication with the public. If we don't do it, it can become destructive. If there's not proper governance, if there's not proper communication, it becomes destructive and it can damage an organization, as we have seen. Moreover, SARS needs strong and capable leaders at the top who are able to provide guidance, experience and wisdom needed to mold and grow the new generation of SARS managers and prepare them effectively to take over the mantle of leadership. And if I may pause there a while to touch on this, I start thinking I can go on early retirement next year, and it scares the heck out of me. What are we laying down for the next generation? Who are the people we're growing to put in place to take this organization forward? And we're going to be measured as a leadership as to who we put in place, how we empower them, how we train them, how we embed the culture, the values, etc., into the next generation to be able to take this organization forward. And just as a scary aside, I just asked for the figures with regards to the IT environment. And why this is so important. In the 3-year retirement forecast, in the current years, in the next 2 years, over 90 people can retire. Now that's a significant number that can go. Are we preparing for the future? That's why I don't want to dwell in the past. I want to dwell in the future and move on and ensure that we mold and grow this new generation. In this difficult time, as a first step though, it is necessary for the SARS leadership to commit in investing and nurturing people. We have to ensure our training of people is in place. Judge, I've been fascinated. I haven't been exposed in certain areas in the last while in my life here. Engaging with the Indians, the Chinese, the Brazilians and Russians recently in the BRICS process, where people go for 6 months training and then are only put on the front line. We take 1 week, 2 weeks, basic induction, and then a customs officer needs to sit at the border post and know that this is a plastic of a such and such a type that deserves tariff code X and Y and Z that carries such and such a duty. We're not doing our staff a favor. We need to nurture our people. We have to offer, and this is going to be a theme that I'm going to come back, we've got to offer our taxpayers the best service possible. And it's important because on service, everything is built. It's not on the whip that everything is built. It is on service that everything is built. The whip is only for the minority. The service is for the majority, and it's on that we need to build. We need to ensure that the treatment of all our taxpayers, and I've engaged with the Commission on this, needs to be impartial, and the application of law needs to be fair in every respect. So when I do an audit on the evidence leader, I need to apply the same rules when I apply it to somebody else. I need to be fair. Case selection must be fair. The audits must be fair, must be just and properly set out in law. Obviously, and we've got a target for this year of 1.345 trillion rand. We have to do everything in our power to meet that target. It comes down to giving government the ability to be able to do what they need to do. We need to commit to doing that. We obviously need to regain the cutting edge as a modernizing organization. Modernization is not a once-off event. Modernization is an ongoing journey. As long as I live, we're going to have to modernize. We're never going to reach the end of modernization. Probably overemphasizing it, but we need to be committed to continually learning and improving and constantly raising the bar. It's not e-filing in 2008 that we brought in is not acceptable in 2018. We've got to say, and we all see it, every website that you go to in the world, you'll see they modernize their look and feel to look fresh, to serve their client, to find things easier, to do things easier. That's an ongoing thing. We have to be exactly the same. We need to be constantly raising the bar, not being satisfied of where we are. And I think we've fell back in that regard. We obviously need to commit to the safeguarding of the confidentiality of taxpayer information. But at the same stage, SARS must not hide behind the confidentiality to protect wrongdoing. How we get there, I'm not sure. We need some wisdom, some guidance as to how we get there. But while your tax affairs need to be kept confidential, if I treat you in a certain way, SARS must not be protected. And for me, that's the most crucial thing. How do we balance those two aspects? I'm not sure.
Well, I'll tell you now, integrity, that's all it requires. Sorry to interrupt you. I just thought I'd answer your question.
Thank you, Judge. Obviously, the issue of public interest in this space, and I know that there are many journalists sitting here, and I've written back and saying public interest does not trump Chapter 6 of the Tax Administration Act. I've written many of those letters, but I don't want to hide behind Chapter 6 of the Tax Administration Act. So, yes, integrity, Judge, very important. We must obviously commit to being politically conscious as an organization, but we must never, ever be partisan in any way. And I'd like to read this. It is said that great character is built in times of adversity, and how well we rise above these events will be a true test for us as individuals and as an organization. Resilient institutions weather difficulties and are able to learn, grow, and mature through these adverse experiences. This is our hope, my hope, and belief for SARS going forward. And for me, it's most important that we look ahead. Maybe some people here sketch quite a negative view of the SARS environment that has existed. It gives me great joy as I go around that this situation is not totally bleak. I go and I bump into people, many people who are here, many other people, and they've got a hope. They've got an intent to do what is right. And I'll touch on something that so encouraged me a little later. So it's not totally bleak. SARS is a functioning organization as we sit here today. And we've seen, I think you've seen testimony, Judge, from many of my colleagues, which just elaborate that there is a working ethic and integrity amongst many of our people. And we need to harvest that in order to move forward.
Mr. Kingon, I must say in layman's terms that this commission has been blown away by the quality of most of the people that we've come across and interviewed. The quality and the talent is extraordinary in this organization, and it's what gives us energy and hope as we do this work.
Advocate, they're unique crew. They are so unique, committed. You know, you go into the, and I'm going to go back a few years. You go into the test environment and you find people at 11 o'clock at night testing software to ensure that the taxpayer can submit the return, testing fixes over the weekend, ensuring they're there long hours to do the rollouts. People on Saturdays at the moment at our branch offices, people at Bike Bridge working in a heat of 40 degrees, and I've been up there, difficult circumstances, but being committed to do the right thing. We've got committed employees, and that I fully concur, and I encourage them. There are specific areas that need action. We obviously, and one of the key areas, and I comes back to the revenue and which the country looks to us to be able to provide. We have to restore confidence, and that's part of the process of this commission. Restore confidence in the organization of SARS. We have to have confidence in the tax system in our country in order to take ourselves forward. And there are many things that are on the table in that regard. Just recently at the tax in Durban, we spoke of cooperative compliance and the willingness of tax practitioners who've been messaging me even privately, saying, we want to help, we want to come alongside you and take this forward. Let's design a cooperative compliance model. But there are certain actions that we have taken and are taking, and I'd like to just inform and just convey to the Commission in certain of these. And I'm just going to elaborate as I go, Judge, because I need to fill in gaps to give you the understanding of the things. In terms of the Davis Tax Committee, we are in the process of analysing. In fact, we have given some submissions through of the many papers that the Davis Tax Commission has made. They've performed a huge amount of work in this space. And I'd like to just say and pause a while and say that SARS has not given full cooperation to the Davis Tax Commission at all times in these last few years that they've existed. And I can't recall if Judge Dennis Davis gave any evidence in that regard, but there was this reticence to provide information. I remember him even asking me for figures on trust compliance and with regards to public benefit organisation. And there was a bit of a, I don't know why, it's just a bit of a fear in providing it that was created. And I don't think we did justice to this process, but we are doing justice in terms of the recommendations. We don't agree with all of them, but that's part of the process going forward. But we're doing the analysis, and we are hoping to make a way ahead. In terms of our information and communication technology, ICT space as such, we do recognize the challenge of rebuilding this. There are many steps that we've already taken. I was very encouraged that in the last 2 weeks we've approved significant changes for the next year's filing season. There are other significant changes that are on the go. We have to be GRAP, and I don't want to bore people with technicalities, but it's just the way that we account for monies. We have to be GRAP compliant. There's a lot to do in the IT infrastructure space, but we need to come back. As my discussion with the team yesterday, we need to highlight what are the top areas we need to fix there. Let's go run with that, and we are in the process of that. I believe the groundwork has been laid for filing season next year that is fundamentally going to change the landscape of tax in our country forever. And for me, that gives me great hope. I do believe that we can reverse the trajectory of the neglect of the IT space that we've seen in the last four odd years. In terms of the service charter, in our APP for last year, we did commit to release the service charter. We finally got to release it on the 2nd of July. 1st of July was a Sunday. 2nd of July was a Monday, where we launched the filing season at Alberton with the Minister of Finance. But we launched the charter, which basically gives aspirations for service delivery. And it's an important building block and an undertaking by us to the public of service. And I want to just pause, Judge, and people, how do we balance service and compliance? the carrot and the stick, as I put it in layman's terms. Primarily, our driver for compliance in our country must be service, not the stick. Yes, you need the stick, you need the threat, you need to know that jail awaits, maybe. But if we can offer a better service, I think that we're going to encourage compliance. If it's easy for me to make my pay-as-you-earn submission, claim my ETI, pay my VAT, lodge a dispute, submit my trust return, whatever if I can just make it that one little bit easier, people will do it willingly. I know even for myself, if a form on the internet is difficult from some company, and by the way, all companies face this, not just SARS, but if a form is difficult, you park it. You don't get it done. If it's easy, you quickly do it and it's done. Simplicity is one of the key things that we need to move, and I think Mr. Hoare yesterday did elaborate on where we came with the journey from the so-called big buff form, and he drove me mad in shrinking it down to 2 pages. He will remember those discussions, but that's important. Service drives compliance, and we need to do that. That's why we've released the service charter. That's why we've built, in fact, and I'm going to bore people with things they don't know, what we call a pulse dashboard. It basically gives the pulse of our business that enables us to measure any aspect of our business. Judge, on my iPad here now, I can pull up how many people are queuing in which branch. That's the type of data we need to know. Where are our people queuing? Where are they not queuing? How many disputes? What's my debt, etc., etc. So that's the service charter. Linked to service, obviously, is the issue of refunds. And refunds in general will be an ongoing issue, and as long as I've been at SARS, complaints of refunds taking too long have been there. And the issue comes down to balancing risk and service. I don't think we've got it quite right yet. And we need to find a way, and I'll give you an example. There's certain clientele whose tax returns, whatever, whether it be VAT, income tax, gets stopped either every year or every month or every second month, etc. Yet they are huge clients who are not going to run away overnight. Should we be stopping them every month? Shouldn't we be putting that money back in the economy quicker and allowing those to flow without the burden of compliance with the audit processes? That would deal with volumes in my team. It will deal with getting money effectively back into the economy. And I'm in the process of looking at that, and there's certain announcements which I can't go into as yet in terms of this space. But we have to look at this because people need the money back to run their businesses. And we need to make sure that that happens. But at the same stage, Judge, I cannot believe the amount of fraud that we are facing in personal income tax daily. If I was in a public forum, I would have asked my colleague who's sitting here from business and individual tax. We stop hundreds of people who simply trying to claim fictitious amounts for tax deductions. I had one person in our office. He even came to see me with bodyguards and all. He had claimed 160 million fictitiously for VAT. And he thought it was right. It was 100%. Now, if these things is an ongoing thing, how do you balance risk, service?
May I ask you about... Sorry, carry on.
Mr. Kingon, 2 questions about the refunds that have come up in the course of this inquiry. There is a perception that there was deliberate delay and deliberate withholding of VAT refunds in order to artificially boost SARS's revenue at the moment that the target is measured. Have you found any evidence to that effect?
Direct evidence, no. Concerning areas, yes. And obviously, we would obviously have to look at whatever that might be. The issue, though, and it's refunds can be held back for multiplicity of reasons. It could be held back because of an audit, it gets delayed or whatever. Now, is it intentional or not? I'm not going to comment, and I haven't got evidence to that effect.
You say not going to comment. I would like you to comment. Is it something that one must take up further? Is there someone that we must ask whether there's been instructions to hold them back? So in that regard, I think I must interrupt you in your very positive outlook, and so we need to know.
Yeah, Judge, I haven't got evidence that a instruction in order to make the March target or anything like that, that here's an instruction, stop now, we're not going to refund because we must make the target. I haven't got evidence of that.
You have suspicion of that?
I've got concerns about that, Judge, yes, with
A
regards...
concern different to a suspicion.
Well, it is the same, I suppose, Judge.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, whether we have got time to look further and what we've got already, we'll have to deal with. I just wanted your assistance there.
But who would give such a requirement that there must be a withholding?
But you must remember...
For the purposes that you've just...
There are a couple of aspects, and much can be said about this, and even... I mustn't preempt matters of the next week, which we got the medium-term budget policy statement coming forward. There are various ways that you can stop refunds. So obviously, we stop refunds for audit and investigation, etc. We stop refunds for bank detail changes that are incorrectly done. Is there a process whereby a person goes into the system and saying, we need to meet this target tomorrow? Yes, it's possible. Where would that decision come from? I think that we'd have to go and investigate.
Mr. Kingon, the other issue of around VAT refunds, there's been quite a bit of media reporting around the Oak Bay refunds, and we'd like to understand what you know about this.
Well, sorry, can I interrupt? Because we have had a conversation about that you probably perhaps are not privy to, and that we've looked, with your assistance, looked at these refunds. And there are, in fact, a number, I'm not sure it's necessary to work out exactly how many, but lots of refunds that have gone into an attorney's trust account, for example, and refunds that have gone to a non-associated company as well. I haven't gone into that a lot because I think you were yourself concerned about that, and you had yourself ordered an investigation.
Correct.
Could you just tell me what the outcome was of that?
Okay, so there are a couple of aspects. The one issue relates to Section 44.3D, and forgive me, I might get the sections wrong, of the VAT Act, and its application, as well as Section 72 of the VAT Act. We've taken a council view on that, and we feel very comfortable that in order to be a VAT vendor in our country, with the exceptions as set out in 44.3D, you're required to have a bank account in your own name.
So what does that mean in the case of what happened with Oak Bay?
It means that that would not be permitted to refund to a third-party bank account. So I did launch an investigation, and I don't necessarily, because it's still in process. The concern is twofold. The first aspect is the decision to allow a third-party bank account. The second aspect relates to, are the refunds actually valid? And I've asked that both be looked at. And there's a long line of aspects with regards to the decision on the banking details, and there's the evidence that has been given to me by the team that did the preliminary review for me, which I've made available to you, is that further audits, and I'm going to use the word audit because it's actually used forensic, but because we're doing it in investigative audit space, needs to be done on the validity, the actual substance of the refunds in question. That is in process.
Sorry, carry on.
Are you suggesting that the refunds were paid without that process being done, without knowing if they were valid?
So let me explain how the process works, because I think it's important, Judge. All these things go through our risk engine and get identified for normally what we call a verification audit. And it's basically a documentary review. So if you put before me documents and they look in order, I would sign off. They went through that process. Does that mean the documents behind that? So I've got a VAT invoice from Advocate Steinberg that was given to me. I'm claiming it as an input for VAT. Is that invoice valid? Is the VAT number on it actually yours? Did you actually pay over the money to SARS for me in order for me to claim it as an input? Those are the questions one needs to check. So, yes, the documentary reviews were done. I've checked it, and in fact, the person is in the audience who heads up that unit. On the face of it, the refunds look legitimate. There are concerns that have been expressed to me, and hence we've moved on, and we're doing further investigation.
Can I just follow that up? Because this one does concern taxpayer affairs, but it's been so much around and it's so controversial that I have no difficulty dealing with it here rather than in confidence. But I confirm with you, I looked at those affairs. It went through a verification audit, but that's just a paper.
Correct.
We'll come back to that in another respect, but then it comes to being paid to third-party accounts. Now, as I looked at that, and I don't have the detailed knowledge you have, it seemed to have gone through a regular process. In other words, I did not see any fingerprint of interference in the process. Is that correct?
There are two aspects, Judge. So there were certain changes in the bank detail, as I have the evidence that has been put and looked at in December of 2016, early December 2016, where it went through a standard process inside SARS, which resulted in a attorney's trust account being utilized to pay refunds into. That went through a standard process. There was no interference or otherwise with it. Should it have been approved? No. Is it unique? No, unfortunately. In fact, part of the process was I asked that we look what other vendors out there. Remember, and maybe just to back up 2 seconds, VAT vendors, there's a specific restriction in 44.3D with regards to third-party bank accounts. The Income Tax Act does not have similar restrictions. So I can pay my refund to a third party. The law doesn't prevent it, as the same as the VAT law prevents it. So the standard process was followed in December 2016 for those attorney trust accounts and was approved by the teams incorrectly in terms of the standard operating procedure, but I don't believe it was malicious, Judge. And you get things. People allow deduction incorrectly. Mistakes are made, just like at the bank. Mistakes are made. That's the fact. We then get a request in May of 2017 where there's a formal request to change to another third party. That went through the process which has been in the public domain, which I'd prefer not to elaborate because there's other processes underway pertaining to that at the moment. We then get a further request later on in 2017 where a 72 ruling was granted and further changes were made to another company. And that has also been in the public domain. People have quoted that.
Well, you say, sorry, can I just finish? You say there's a 72 approval. You're talking about Section 72.
Of the VAT Act.
But I mean, that didn't permit that either.
Correct.
So that was also incorrectly done, though.
In my view, yes.
And that was a payment not to an attorney's trust account, but to another company account, but the company wasn't a subsidiary and therefore it shouldn't have been allowed.
Correct.
And you would have ended up in the situation there, though, that the Act does not enable you to repay that, or even on the assumption it was repayable. So you've got a bit of a catch-22.
Correct.
There. But nonetheless, the law should be applied, which is you can't pay it to that.
Correct.
Just clarity exactly on that point. You're saying the people who processed it did it in good faith, but in error, there was an error of law.
The December 16.
Are you, the distinctions
I'm talking the
among
December
those?
16
Okay.
one. But I want to just emphasize, and part of the review that we did, I asked them to pick up what other cases. Sorry, I was going down that road and I got sidetracked. Forgive me. We have found a number of other instances, nothing to do with the company we are talking about now, where attorney's trust account and other accounts have been utilized as third party. And that's gone through normal approval processes, but incorrectly. We have to see how we're going to tighten this up. Because, Judge, if you go back to pre-2009, the legislation had a certain wording. And then in 2009, you go and have a look at the explanatory memorandum that brought about the amendment in 2009. And it was specifically there to prevent fraud. And that was the purpose for which the amendment was put in place, which is the wording of 44.3D today.
Anyway, I just wanted to clarify that because I did look at it myself and a number of other taxpayer issues, some with you, some without you, but it's difficult to interpret some of them without assistance. And my interpretation there was correct, is that it went through the normal process. It shouldn't have gone through the normal process.
Correct.
But it happens at times, and there was no fingerprint of any
Correct.
interference.
What-
Yeah, sorry.
What do you have to say about the information of that taxpayer having ended up in the public domain, bearing in mind the point that you've emphasized around the sacrosanctity of ever been inquired on as to how that taxpayer's information got put into the public domain?
Yeah, so, one must be very careful. When I was overseas in early June of 2017, and where this happened, and it leaked a short while later, there was, and I'm going to put it bluntly, there was a witch hunt as to who had leaked. And people were made to feel guilty who have got no reason to feel guilty, some of them in this very room. I had to give an affidavit that I didn't leak that information. I wasn't even here, but it doesn't matter. And one must be careful going on little witch hunts, because ultimately the innocent are the ones who get victimized in the process. I have no evidence as to how it got out into the public domain. I don't know. Whether it comes back to the issue. We're needing to restore SARS to have integrity and trust, etc., because the heart of confidentiality is an important principle.
But do you have measures for staff to raise issues where they believe there's been conduct which does not accord with your rules, with your standards, with the law, with the values of the institution, where they could raise them up and have them dealt with to minimize the risk of information being then leaked out because it's not being properly dealt with? Because you don't want to set up these leaks as a standard that cannot be consistent with the promotion of the law.
No, 100%. And I will, if you don't mind, sir, I'm going to get to a proposal which I'd like to put. It comes down to, we do have what we call a whistleblowers policy. I'll get to that just now as well, just to touch on it. But we're needing to find a way, and this comes down to the heart of what I said earlier. You don't want misconduct in an organization to be protected by secrecy. It's an important issue. But at the same stage, we're needing to find a way that staff have got the ability to come forward and be protected in disclosing things they believe to be incorrect.
Well, I know you say I'll come back to, but I would like to just follow up at the moment on
Sure.
what my colleague, Mr. Kastner, said. You know, it seems to me there are leaks and there are leaks. There are some leaks that are used in order to, in the course of intrigues, etc., to discredit people and so forth. There are other leaks. They're not really leaks, they're the whistleblowers who go to the press because nothing happens inside. And that's what, you know, I don't think this commission would have been established but for people having gone to the press, because things would not have been known. And I mean, people went to the press, and you're quite right to talk about the litigation. And what happened was to try and close the press down, not because the taxpayer was complaining, but because there was a criticism of internally. That was what was happening. So there are leaks and leaks, as it were. And my colleague I said, he raises it, and I think it's quite correct. Now you can't. That happens because you can't deal with them inside, because you don't trust inside.
We couldn't deal with it, I think, so to be perfectly honest. The ability to raise things that were wrong, we didn't have the, I'm going to be blunt and say I didn't have the courage maybe to raise some of the things. We need to have that to be able to flow freely to an independent body, in my view, that would be able to investigate this, and I'll get to this in a moment. But you have to have it, because if it wasn't, I'm a bit schizophrenic here, Judge, because on the one side, leaks sadden me.
No, absolutely.
But on the other side, if it wasn't for leaks, we wouldn't be here today.
Exactly.
So I'm a
But
bit
the point is, we shouldn't be here today at all.
correct. But Judge, that comes back to what you said earlier, integrity.
Yeah, and I know you're coming back to it, and I'm sorry to press you, but I would like to just follow up on, I think my colleague has raised something very important, because as I say, but for that we wouldn't have been here at all.
I know.
But at the same time, we shouldn't be here at all. Now, how does one stop that? In other words, you say, oh, well, it's a matter of integrity, we leave it behind, the Commission says, well, you must have better people with greater integrity. That's not enough.
Yeah.
We know now that something must be done, that people do have an outlet, that they don't have to go to the press. Because the problem with going to the press, it seems to me, a lot of what the press has said is correct, but they don't get the full information. They can't inquire further.
Correct.
And so it creates even more difficulty, not because of the press, but because of their limited ability to investigate.
Judge, I'd like to respond on two.
So what does one do about that?
So my proposal, which I'll get to, is an Inspector General of type that has got powers that can get this information, to be able to receive this, act on it with integrity, to be able to investigate it, have access to the SARS systems, and to make a determination and an instruction.
Well, that's what I'm thinking, because that's what's happened here. Some of the things that we've looked at have come from the press. Sometimes they're ahead of us, because people are not, they're afraid to talk to us, but they'll talk undercover to the press. And you read it. Now, it's been advantageous because we then have the power to go and look at it. Now, you need the two to be combined, as it were.
Chair, I've learned, Judge, I've learned far more from the press sometimes than I knew internally.
Well, I tell you something, we've learned something from the press.
And I must be honest, and to the media colleagues here, I dread getting their queries sometimes, because I know it's one of those things. But it's good. It's part of a good democracy that we be held to account. But Judge, what is it? The Inspector General for me is the solution to the thing, and I'm going to speak to that. But what it is not, and to my IT colleagues, you know what happened? We had all the cameras put up. That was party to the thing. We've got cameras on the photostat machines that people are not copying things. We have got our USB ports that I cannot copy things to a memory stick. Even on my laptop, I cannot copy things to a memory stick, because we can thinking those are the ways. We've got, I had my own private iPad where I had my SARS email, so at night I could just sit in my bed and, yes, watch a movie and get my email done in between. That was taken away. Then they give me a SARS iPad that I can just do that on. But those security measures are not going to take place, because I can take a photo shot of a thing with a camera and send it off. They're so artificial. It's the back of it. We're needing staff with integrity, uprightness, honesty, agree with a higher purpose.
Depends with your cameras who you're spying on. Are you spying on your own staff, or are you protecting your staff from other people? So they can be used for two purposes. Anyway, I'd like to hear you on the Inspector General idea, because it's become, in my mind, more and more conscious of the fact that there ought to be someone who has got, for example, the powers of this Commission, but at the same time, the Commission doesn't close off and go away, that someone remains here with these powers to do exactly what's been happening.
I fully support that view, Judge.
Can we talk about it when you get to an
Yes,
appropriate
I will.
time?
Can I?
Please go on.
Thank you. Thank you. Just moving to disputes as a whole. I think it's important to note that in respect of disputes, the Ombud has launched a systemic investigation with the concurrence of the Minister of Finance into the administration by SARS of objections and appeals. I want to say publicly that I welcome this review, as it is realized that a number of disputes that are found in favor of SARS is far lower than the international norms. Now, it's an interesting thing, Judge. If you go to the international norms, in the dispute process, normally in a tax administration, more than 60% of all disputes will be found in favor of the taxman, of the tax administration. In SARS, that is below 40%. Now, that's a significant risk. It's a risk because my staff are wasting their time. It's wasting taxpayers' time, tax practitioners' time. We need to get on top of that. And I need to also say that we've got to acknowledge that there are many areas where our timelines for disputes are falling short of the standard as set out in the law. There are specific timelines for this whole process. We need to adhere them. We need to adhere to all the steps that are there in the process. And it's interesting to note that even in the TADIT assessment, this is the one area we fell short of in 2014, was in terms of disputes. Now, I have appointed a senior person within our legal space who's doing this work for us, and has already had meetings with the Ombud, and I believe a very constructive meeting has been held. We must see these systemic investigations as strengthening our hand, not criticizing us. It's part of building the organization. There's another one which I don't have in my notes, the pay-as-you-earn account, which there's another systemic investigation into that, where we applied certain rules historically that is confusing the taxpayers, and us, I may say sometimes, with regards to the reallocation journals that take place on our pay-as-you-earn account. Our Chief Officer of Finance is engaging with the Ombud, already had an engagement on that one. So there's two systemic investigations that are happening at the present, one on disputes and one on accounts. On the illicit economy, just moving on, we're looking forward now. And we've already approved that we're re-establishing this. And this week I had the privilege of signing off the structure for the unit. And we've already got 58 cases that have been identified in terms of this unit. And in fact, the person who's acting in that unit's head is in the room with us today. We're looking forward to the re-establishment of this unit, the capacity that was destroyed in this whole process, for whatever reason it was destroyed. And we believe in so doing, we can do it with proper governance, and we can do it in a transparent way. There's no need for cloak and dagger. This needs to happen in terms of our mandate, in terms of law, in terms of the framework that is set out in the Tax Administration Act.
And I assume tobacco will be back on the radar screen.
Yes, so very importantly, it's good that you raised that, Advocate Steinberg, and Judge, just to say that interventions that we're focusing on at the moment, we speak of illicit financial flows, and there's large volumes. It depends who you believe in terms of illicit financial flows. There's a number of cases that we've been busy with there. Tobacco, we're all aware of the Give Back the Money, the 7 billion program that is being run, where they're putting pressure on us to get the money back, to do this, to do that, and to do the other thing. Tobacco is very much on the thing. The fuel industry, which is a major risk for us in terms of our economy. The last one which I'd like to highlight is clothing and textiles, which is a serious risk, and the risk there is slightly different. Yes, there's tariff and VAT that is incorrectly paid, but it goes down to jobs in our country. Our role as the tax authority is the protection of our economy as well. And we had an engagement with one of the main unions involved in the clothing and textile industry, and we've identified 2 product types that we've got specific focus with regards to the illicit bringing in of goods. And Judge, it's been a fascinating journey for me to see the undervaluation that is taking place in an open fashion. We had a debate between 2 people that was brought to our attention on email from a supplier in a country which I won't name, where they said, no, undervaluation is still possible. It's possible. This is how you do it. Laid out the groundwork to do it. So those are the 4 areas. You are aware in the last week we had arrests of SARS staff as well as police officers with regards to stamping of documents. That had to do with the fuel being taken out, so-called taken out, but it's actually being siphoned into the domestic supply chain. That's got a huge impact in terms of my revenue. It's got an impact on the stability of the road accident fund. And these things we need to get on top of. So on tobacco, the teams had a few raids on Thursday and Friday last week, We were looking at sellers in a number of areas, and we were quite successful in terms of what we picked up. So we've started. The work is in progress, and I'm gratified that we've been able to get this on the go. In terms of the large business unit, if I may move along, what we're going to call it, I'll make that announcement in due course. Yesterday we had a discussion with regards to this, and we've agreed that we are proceeding with the interim structure. By hopefully the middle of December, it will be in place with the interim, and the final structure, obviously with the appropriate head, will be in place by the 1st of April 2019. But I want that interim structure and staff being deployed. We do have an accommodation issue in terms of large business. We will be moving out in due course of where they're currently located, and my procurement office will be dealing with that with the corporate real estate to ensure they're properly located and obviously in the best place to service the clientele which we have.
Just a question there, Mr. Kingon. You are aware that there is concern within SARS that the success of the large business centre, as we understood the evidence, was that it was an end-to-end centre, and it had that 360 view of a taxpayer's affairs. Now there's concern that the new large business centre does not have all the components of the value chain. Can you talk to that?
Yes, I can, and we intend to have the end-to-end. It won't be in place immediately.
Right.
But in the end, you must have an end-to-end value chain in terms of this. Now, we're not talking, for instance, the finance office might be said. I'm not talking those. You're talking of the tax value chain. And I won't bore you because I could go into the tax value chain and identify many things there. But the value chain for LB will be in place end to end. That's our intention. It's going to be a journey, Judge. We're probably going to make a few mistakes, but I do believe we are strengthening on what we had prior to it being closed in terms of its format. The unit we had at the time was too isolated from the rest of the organization. So it was operating on its own. It needs to operate within the framework of SARS. It needs to be on service manager. It needs to operate within that framework, and we're putting that in place. I've got an excellent team that have been working on that day and night and making proposals in that regard.
Sorry, by tax value chain, you're talking legal enforcement, all the support services.
Correct. Well, the support services, I think, is part of the area which I'm not 100% clear. For instance, yes, they'll have finance direct support, but the CFO, they won't have their own CFO, if you understand what I mean, in terms of that process. The High Court Litigation Unit is the next one I'd like to talk to. Litigation, it can be split into various parts, but you're needing a specialist litigation unit that can deal with the more complex litigation within the organization. It is for twofold. Obviously, you want to save on legal costs, which we've gone into a little earlier, but you want to use the skills that we have. This unit, as part of the process, was disbanded. And a decision has been taken, it's in process, but it's early days, to reconstitute this unit. I can't afford, and I sat with a tax advocate last week who had been perusing legal cost things, and she had managed to find time to do her master's in something else in the meantime. But I've got an admitted advocate who's got years of experience in tax work, basically twiddling her thumbs. That's unacceptable. This unit will be reconstituted, and it will deliver and provide the exceptional support that it used to do insofar as impactful litigation. The Compliance Strategy Unit, a decision has been taken to re-establish it and to actively, obviously, monitor tax compliance across the SARS business. We'll therefore again activate the Compliance Evaluation Monitoring Information System to measure taxpayer compliance levels using compliance indicators. This is, I think, some evidence was led in this regard, and that decision was taken, which lay on ice. I don't know. It was taken under Commissioner Moyane in June last year to reconstitute it, but nothing happened. And we are just making sure it happens.
I have a question here, Mr. Kingon.
Yes.
It concerns lifestyle audits as part of the compliance chain. Two elements to my question. We have sat with you during our in-camera evidence sessions, and we've seen that individuals who we know from the media live very extravagant lives, declare very little income. On the other hand, we've heard evidence here that that SARS's auditors are hamstrung in investigating this kind of problem because their KPIs are concerned with the number of cases that they get through. And there's no space made for those long, difficult, complex cases. Now, putting those two things together, there seems to be no lifestyle audits. So if someone who drives a Rolls Royce says, I don't even reach the tax threshold here, nothing happens. We have sat together and seen that, Mr. Kingon. And on the other hand, we have auditors saying, well, we are just trying to meet our KPIs every day. Are you looking at this?
I want to tackle the answer, if I may, Judge, just with a few angles in terms of this. KPIs drive certain behavior. And that, by the way, is true in the debt space, it's true in the audit space. I've seen it true in even a telephone call. You push to a certain time period, you cut it shorter. Could be in serving a client. So KPIs drive behavior. And I think we need to reevaluate that in every area of our business. The ultimate thing is, obviously, it needs in the service space, it needs to drive service. In the compliance space, it needs to drive compliance. And if my KPI is driving a performance that I don't look at everything, there must be something wrong. And I would concur with that.
May I interrupt you there, just to get facts correct? I am told, and I haven't investigated in great detail, that the audit KPIs are at least weighted towards numbers rather than quality. Would that be correct?
That is, and I'm not an expert in this, Judge, but that is what I'm told, yes.
And that's why you get, for example, huge VAT refunds that are paid on no more than a documentary, what do you call it again?
Verification.
Verification, but no one's looking at whether the documents are genuine or not. Because of the KPI is get through as many as possible.
I think, Judge, there's far more complexity to that aspect of the business. But yes, the KPI does drive that I get through it as quickly as possible because I've got so many to do. It does drive that behavior. But I think there needs to be a balance. It's not, there has to be KPIs. We cannot have an investigation where a person sits on a case for months on end and nothing happens, which I've also seen on the other side. So there's a line somewhere in between. Are we right at the moment, Judge? No.
Well, I agree with you.
We have to evaluate that.
Taxpayer affairs, and I say emphatically that you're not right at the moment.
100%, and I would concur with that.
So what do one do about that? How do you then cater for volume and at the same time have people that are able to sit for 6 months and ask questions about people's affairs? Have you got that anything in mind as far as that's concerned?
Well,
sorry if I may interrupt. I would have thought that the one thing that taxpayers would make taxpayers reluctant to pay their tax is if they're in the middle bracket and they watch very rich people not paying tax. Seems to me a very major thing towards tax morality.
Agreed, and that goes down to, are we applying the law fairly in every respect? Right. Judge, I grew up in a and I'm coming to the questions that the evidence leader was asking. I grew up in a thing that, and maybe it was wrong, today we take a photo, but in those days, I used to have a pack of paper in my cubbyhole that if I saw a car that looked beyond the means of people, I wrote it down, the number plate. That was my context. And you would go check, and it would lead then obviously through process to an audit or investigation. The fact of the matter is that we probably moved to a point that we don't look at that enough. And as a result, cases where a person is driving a 3.5 million car but declaring 200,000 per annum is not looked at, and we need to get that right, because it's unfair to you and I who get paid a salary maybe, and we are having to pay as you earn. We have to get that right if we're going to restore confidence in our tax system.
Well, the question I'm asking you is, are you, I have to get it right is one thing.
Yeah.
Are you aware of it and dealing with it, or is it something that is just really...
Judge,
come to your
it's something that I must deal with. I have not started specifically on this journey.
Yeah, okay.
What is
And,
your...
well, if the Commission says, if the Commission says you should start on that journey, will you start on that journey?
Yes, Judge.
I mean, it's not an impractical thing.
No, it's not impractical. But,
Yeah.
Judge, it does premise that we are properly financed and have the sufficient resources to be able to do it.
Mr. Kingon, we've had evidence, about the frustrations and the effect of the disbandment of the High Court Litigation Unit. And you've said you are on the, it's in the pipeline of being re-established. Do you have a date?
Not as yet. Not as yet.
But it's being prioritized.
It is on, and I've got the HR teams working on that at the moment. I haven't got a date for you as yet.
Okay.
Can I just come back to the lifestyle audit issue, if you
Please,
may?
please.
I think there's a couple of aspects that I'd like to do. We used to call it a capital reconciliation. Basically taking a person's capital at a point in time, at another point in time, looking at their lifestyle, looking at their income, and if there's a net deficit, it must come from somewhere. That's what a lifestyle audit is. We need to be able to do that quicker to identify cases. In other words, somehow in the case selection process, it would be my dream that we could do that far more effectively using technology, in other words, IT. That because we've got data from e-Natus on cars, we've got data of companies, I've got data of properties, I've got data of yachts, by the way. I've got data that we're going to get even of service of vehicles ultimately. I've got data of all your income. I've got data of all the government grants and income that you're getting from government. I've got a full picture of you. Why can't I do this electronically and come up with a risk identifier that has done that lifestyle audit in a flash to identify the case?
Well, let me tell you that you don't need to go to the electronic systems yet. If you want a starting point, Advocate Steinberg and I can tell you of a few.
No. Judge, I can tell you of a few as well.
Mr. Kingon, there are many rumours in the corridors here that certain SARS executive mayor leadership in SARS themselves, there's that disparity between what they earn and their lifestyles. Now, Mr. Makubu suggested in his evidence that if you're a chief officer or above in this organization, you should be required to subject yourself to lifestyle audits. What do you think of that proposal?
He and I have spoken before he gave evidence, and he was the one who raised it in the context, and I forget where it was, I cannot remember. But I fully endorse that. In fact, I would go one step further, if I may. Is there not a place that senior public officials' tax affairs become public? It's a question I've been asking myself, and I don't know the answer to that. Just to say that obviously you are aware that the President has made certain pronouncements with regards to lifestyle audits.
Yes.
We are involved in that process, and our teams from investigative audit space, etc., have been just supporting in terms of what can and can't be done. We've obviously got the confidentiality criteria that is there, that needs to be adhered to, which does bind us a little bit, but with taxpayers' approval, you can do it. My ultimate aim is obviously to collect tax. But in terms of the President's made things, we are supporting that process. I would support that from a senior SARS official point of view personally, but I would go one step further in terms of exposing my tax records.
Thank you. Will you go on?
Yeah.
You want a little break, Mr. King?
No, I'd prefer to get this done, Judge, unless you want a break.
No, you carry on.
I would like to get this done. And it goes on, Judge. I'll get there. I will get there. I've printed my sheets in extra spacing and that I can just have it at a glance of an eye. The next issue, Judge, much evidence has been laid, I believe, and obviously you hear of the disciplinary processes that have been utilized in the organization, whether it be from an investigative or the actual disciplinary processes. So I will be instructing, and I haven't done it yet. I started typing this week, but I got so caught up in terms of the process to instruct our human resources to do an audit of all the disciplinary cases that have taken place and are taking place. This is to ensure that there's no spurious or malicious reasons for the processes that have been followed. We can't allow our internal investigative space and the disciplinary processes to be utilized for anything but pure purposes of preventing fraud and corruption. And it's an important issue for me that we have to put in place this review. I will be instructing this, and it is my intention that this be done in order to prevent future abuse, because my worry is what happens in future when I'm not here. What are the processes that should be in place? And I'll be making a proposal in that regard with regards to the Inspector General. But in the short term, I want to set up an oversight committee of people who will basically advise before a case is started and before a case is prosecuted or not prosecuted. Because maliciousness can happen both ways. You can decide not to investigate or to investigate. You can decide to charge or not charge. I want an oversight governance committee that will decide this, not individuals. And that is what I intend to put in place.
Mr. Kingon, a question to you. It seems anomalous that the very individuals who perpetrated this regime of fear and unfairness would now be the ones to carry forward into the future. Is it not perhaps appropriate to bring an outsider in to do this in the meantime?
May I just add to that? My concern really is processes that are in place at the moment. We can talk about a process for the future, but to get some, to get some of the stuff out of the way now that people are afraid of.
That's what I'm wanting to do.
But I mean, should you, Advocate Steinberg asked the question, should the people who actually instigated be the ones that audit it?
No.
Should one not get an outsider in to look at all your processes in place at the moment and say, look, this is spurious and this is vindictory and
Judge, I do believe within my teams I can find independently minded people. I really, Judge, my money is so tight. I don't want to go out again and again and again.
Yes.
My Chief Officer of Finance is going to give me a bit of a clip if I continue to just spend money like this. I don't think it's necessary to go out. I have got people of integrity. I am not saying in what I've said that I'm going to use the people who've been involved to review. They obviously have to be involved to give evidence in terms of what they've got or haven't got. But I need to find the independent. I think you're right, Judge. I need to make sure that it's an independently minded review. And I'll put that in place and make sure that is. I just don't want to go spend more money.
No, I understand. But if I may just make a suggestion, I think it would be a good idea to satisfy people that they're not being pursued for ulterior purposes. Yes. Sorry, carry on.
Just moving on to project management governance. I think evidence was led, Ms. Sue Berger, earlier this week. I think it was this week. The week seemed
yes.
to join in each other. And she highlighted the delays from, and I call it the light bulb moment. We need this until delivery. And there are numerous governance processes in between, business requirements, specifications. We love using the acronyms of BRS, et cetera, et cetera. But from that point, and the governance processes, in my view, is too long. We need to find a way that we can be agile in this environment. We need to be able to decide on something and deliver on something within months, not years. And so we need to do a fundamental review there. How are we going to do that? I haven't started this yet, but this is my intention. The other aspect that I just wanted to touch on Currently, our NBAC approval is a rotating chairmanship, bid adjudication committee. It is my view that the Chief Officer of Finance needs to chair this committee. He's the accountable person. He needs to chair this committee and take accountability for it, and it is my intention to change the rotating chair of this committee. I was going to address some of the governance on the whole issue of compromises, but governance in general needs to be there to ensure that there's no maliciousness, obviously, but that we are abiding by the law and applying it fairly and equitably. But if you have a look at the scope of compromises, write-offs, temporary write-offs in the last few years, my business is collecting money, not writing it off. And we need to just make sure. I'm not saying there's anything, but we just need to review it. It's a thing I just wanted to put on the table.
Well, Mr. King, we're aware of debt that's been written off while there's still a live dispute around that debt. Surely that can't be right.
I am aware of that case, and that will be part of the review. International peer reviews, and I just wanted to touch on this. I did reference earlier the TADAT, and for those of you who don't know what TADAT is, it's Tax Administration Diagnostic Assessment Tool. In fact, we've got a person in our organization trained on this. He won't be doing what I want to say in a moment. But SARS does not act in isolation. We're part of a world community. In fact, the tax community is quite a tight-knit group. And we work together in many, many aspects, as you are aware, whether it be FATCA, the Common Reporting Standard, etc. But accordingly, we have requested that a TADAT assessment be performed on SARS to determine its current status. And that is, I'm not sure of the exact where it is today, but that decision's been taken. Similarly, in the customs environment, the World Customs Organization will be requested to conduct a peer review on the SARS customs. And we believe in so doing we can help strengthen. So we've got the ombuds, we've got the commission, we've got other peer reviews. We must see this all as building blocks, which will hopefully lead to a solid structure going forward.
Sorry, Mr. King, on those international peer reviews, historically, were they performed?
I am not sure, Professor, in terms of the custom space, but as I indicated earlier, the TADAT one was done in 2014.
OECD?
I'm not sure if there's an OECD, I speak under correction, I don't know. But maybe just while I'm on the OECD, I've had excellent engagements with the OECD since I came to office. And we've restored the relationship with them to the extent that if I've got any area, they'll even get people to be seconded and to come help train our people. So we need to use these organizations. They've got expertise that we need.
With regard to the World Customs Organization, we had evidence that shortly before Bain came and restructured customs, the WCO had reviewed customs and said it was doing well, it was on the up and up. And there were a series of reviews before that. So it seems there previously was that kind of relationship and peer review going on in customs.
I don't know as I sit here. I couldn't say. But yes, let's accept that. The question is then why change it? And that's a question which I will leave to the Commission. The fact, though, is what we have seen happening, and my Acting Chief Officer of Customs can attest to this, and I'll get to this in a moment. But in the customs space, we've seen service deteriorate in terms of how long it takes to clear goods, etc.
But while you're on that, you were talking earlier, Mr. Kingon, about in some of the BRICS countries, they train for 6 months and that before, and you need it. I would suggest that a lot of these international organizations, OECD and that, would gladly help on training.
100%. And what has been interesting, Professor, is that even in the BRICS countries, on the customs space, there's a move towards even utilizing each other's training facilities on certain topics. And there's a development in that regard that I won't go into today. But yes, there is synergies to be had even with our SADC countries. In terms of ATAF, which operates in Africa, we need to utilize all of these things. We do not know it all.
And that's cost effective. You
It's
don't have to pay
hugely
for it.
cost effective, and it benefits us as an organization. Just touching on protected disclosure and whistleblowers policy, just to say that we have rewritten the policy. Obviously, the Commission, people have been fearful in coming here, Judge, that they'll be victimized.
I know.
In terms of coming here. We need to protect them. We do have a whistleblowers policy. We've rewritten it to be a protected disclosure policy with certain checks and balances. We need to implement it. I haven't as yet. It's awaiting my signature. Moving to displaced staff. This is where we get emotional again.
You know, Mr. Kingon, let me just disclose one thing about the inner workings of this commission. Ms. Steinberg has had, I don't know how many boxes of tissues in her office for people she's seen. Yes, so...
I need a VAT refund for the number.
If I may, on a lighter note, my chief officer, Mr. Fabian Murray, can stand up. You can go see him afterwards. Around 200 experienced employees were displaced in the operating model review. Many of them were highly skilled, hugely experienced people who had accumulated years of experience and institutional knowledge that is exceptional. I was thinking last night and in preparation, how many years of experience? It runs into thousands, Judge, years of experience. Their expertise and contributions have been sorely missed as the inefficiencies and problems of the new operating model have become apparent. Hey, we've missed them. We have started a process of recognizing each person's particular skill to match it to a position, and it is tended where possible. And this is something that we're considering. Can we reinstate them? And that is something that we are dealing with. This process is unprecedented for us. And I invite my colleagues, many of them are here, work with me, work with us to achieve the outcome that is beneficial to everyone, to SARS, and most importantly, to our country.
Just a question, Mr. Kingon. Your CO for DIST expressed the view that...
Sorry, who?
Your CO for DIST expressed the view that in that space, people who'd been in SARS for many years were less useful. Is that your view too?
Not at all. Totally the contrary. They're extremely useful. We need to utilize their skills to the full. And it comes back to what I said earlier. We've got a new generation coming through. They can be used to empower them as well as deliver in terms of the current mandate. You know, I engaged, and the hurts of the last week is exceptional. I engaged the IT team yesterday, and the pain in the room was tangible. They've got vision that I can only dream of. We need to harvest that. And it's how we do that that's going to be the judge of where we are. When people look back, how are we going to harvest those skills of these 200 resources and others? That's what we're going to be judged on. And in my view, we need to make a success of it. They are not beyond their sell-by date in the very least. In fact, contrary, their sell-by date is many years hence. I think my sell-by date is closer than all of them in that room that are there. And I feel very confident in that regard.
Yes. I don't know if you heard, but Mr. Hoare said that the only reason that business doesn't poach those resources is because they don't want to disempower SARS. But they are the best in the country, he said.
I would concur with that. The trouble that you sit with is when demotivating things take place. It affects your psyche. It affects the very person you are. I've felt it. It's a fact. So I respect Mr. Hall. He's setting up a new bank, and I respect that the staff have not been poached. I need every single one of those people. I need them, and I need them to be doing everything possible to rebuild this organization.
You know, I've just made a note of what you'd said earlier about succession. I've seen some very, very good people here, young people, who obviously have a future if they're allowed to use it. I don't know how you get a succession without someone to succeed, as it were. In other words, to pass down something that you move on with. So it struck me as rather odd from management to saying get rid of the old fellows and just put in new people. You've got to go through the process of succeeding, as it were. If you want succession, you must succeed to something.
Judge, the key to success is balancing old with new.
Yes. Yeah.
It is not only new or only old. We have to transform. Transformation has to be on our agenda as an organization. We have to. We couldn't have stayed where we were in 97 when we came into being 21 years ago and not transform from there. You have to transform, but you don't do it by just putting in new and throwing out the old, because in so doing, you are failing to reap the wealth, the thousands of years that I say, knowledge that we have. So I don't believe I've got a model yet, Judge, that deals with this, but we have to put our minds to it to ensure that proper succession takes place, that when person A leaves, person B just automatically steps into the shoes and can succeed in terms of that.
You've got some extraordinarily good young people here. Do you know that?
I do know that, Judge, and they put me to... I'm just astounded. And let me just say also, I'm astounded by their loyalty to the organization. Many of them could have left. I'm astounded.
There's huge institutional knowledge here.
Very much so. We have lost. We've lost institutional knowledge. There are many people who've left that I look and I say, I wish so-and-so was here to help with that or the other thing. But to say we haven't, no, that's a fallacy. Just in terms of people, the one area I wanted to touch on, and it's work in progress at the moment. We had a process whereby office administrative support staff were being placed in different grades all over the place. In other words, there was no standards being applied that you got a standard grading process for office support staff. So it was very important for us as an organization to standardize that for going forward. But there were a lot of people who were affected in grades which were higher. And the process that was undergone, that went out, that was put in place, was keeping the salaries of those people, but to downgrade them in terms of grades. I'm reversing that. I'm in the process of reversing that. It's amazing the amount of hurt, not touching a person's pocket, because that's not it, but to downgrade a person, it's a hurtful thing.
It's about dignity, I think.
And we're putting in place the steps to reverse that. It costs us nothing in the organization. In future, the new grading model must be followed. You can't have one office having a level 6 and another office a level 4B as office support. It's not fair to anybody because they're expected to do similar work. So that is work in progress. But I just wanted, those are the two areas that I just wanted to touch on. A very important part of our business is customs. And my acting chief officer says he often feels like an orphan, but and I do want to, and I am speaking also to my staff here, Judge. I'm probably abusing you a little bit in speaking to my staff.
No, you're not doing that at all, I assure you.
But customs...
I think it's quite appropriate, if I'm honest.
Customs is an important aspect, an equal aspect of my business. And it's important that customs be given the recognition that they need. We are fundamentally changing the way we view and carry on our mandate in this regard. In addition to simply being an administrative authority that extends control over the cross-border movement of goods, we will be enhancing our customs service. And just to say, when a container is stopped, there are various things that play out in terms of a container stopped. There are costs involved in a container being stopped to the person who's buying those goods. And it's a huge cost. I speak under correction, but they call it demurrage costs, and they've got their own language customs. I think it's around 18,000 Rand a day for that container to be stopped. If you're bringing in goods and we stop it for longer than necessary, that's impacting the cost to the economy. We cannot afford it. And we should be closer to 2 days to releasing those containers, but I believe we were getting closer to the 23-day mark. Now that's unacceptable. And we need to fix that, and we're in the process of fixing that, and I'm excited about this space. What was also very interesting, Judge, is that often the container stopped. The duty that is levied by the process, correctly, is far lower than the demurrage cost, the extra costs in stopping that container. The other issue we need to understand in our business is that in our country, the automotive industry is a major aspect of our economy. And they work a lot on the just-in-time principle. In other words, goods come just in time for their factory lines. We can't afford delays in those processes. We need to make sure that we are not costing the economy in terms of this. We need a mind shift change that requires customs officers to have a better appreciation of the impact of their actions or lack thereof in the economy. The unwarranted delay of legitimate trade is unacceptable, and it's a cost to the economy, and specifically in the current economic climate we can ill afford. I have mentioned that we are overhauling training, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn that our Acting Chief Officer of Customs wants to introduce a new induction course for customs officers by year end to ensure that we start this process of the proper training and equipping our staff to deal with what is out there. Equipping our staff and let them understand the values, our core values that we as an organization hold dear to. So that is work in progress, but a skill level across tax and customs is a fundamental building block in order to be a successful revenue service. We have also enhanced our engagements with trade so that we can respond to the needs that are out there. I've had meetings, and I think you've had evidence led by the South African Association of Freight Forwarders, who's a representative body. We've had engagements, and we've had very constructive engagements, and the feedback I'm already getting is that things have turned around in the customs space, and I want to compliment my staff for the work that they're doing in that regard. We are going to change this business. We're going to make it a success, and I believe we're going to see a new SARS arising as a phoenix out of the ashes, and we're going to make a thing.
Well, just remember, you've only got 30 days left to do all of this.
I've got a little longer than 30 days.
Well, 60 days, how many of your 90 have gone?
I've got another 60, Judge.
Okay, well. Can we have a little break?
You may, Judge.
Thank you.
Sure.
It's been splendid. It's been splendid.
10:15.
What time do you
you
come
must
back?
give a marker.
Sorry.
22?
Judge, 22,
12.
20 to 12, we'll resume.
Mark?
Is that very
By the way, while we're settling down, Norman, I want to compliment you. You know, you produce these transcripts so rapidly. We had a 7-hour day, and at 11:30 that night you sent me a whole transcript. Extraordinary. Thank you.
Will you carry on, Mr. Kingon?
Maybe, Judge, forgive me, I'm not very sympathetic to people who might smoke or otherwise. I tend to carry on with meetings without thinking that people, and so I just carry on. It's my nature, forgive me.
No, don't worry about that.
Judge, just to somebody at the break just informed me, and it's with regards to the international assessments. We have had 4 done in the customs space, so I wasn't aware of that, and I'm not sure of the content. I don't know. I can't speak to it, but it's important that we understand that. I was dealing just with trade, and the issue with trade, you know, it's actually very few people who do deal with the majority of the trade. We must make sure that we service them properly. That's why it's important that we engage with entities like SARF to ensure that we understand their pains. It's exactly like with the recognized controlling bodies. You must engage your clientele at all times and be open to criticism, to hear what they are saying, because then you can be far more responsive. So in the customs space, it's equally so. We will also be enhancing our international engagements at a bilateral, regional and multilateral level to ensure that South Africa is able to influence global customs developments and reap practical benefits for local companies in foreign markets. This is important to us. So just recently, my colleagues and I were in Beitbridge. We had a bilateral with the commissioner from the Commissioner General from Zimbabwe. We've had meetings with the Lesotho. We've had meetings with Swaziland. These are part of the things that we have to do, and we've got to be. I don't know. I just need more hours in the day, but we've got to do it far more to build up these relations, because ultimately a lot of our trade goes through these neighboring countries, and we need to ensure that we've got good relations. Because ultimately you want to lead to an exchange of information, Judge, automatically flowing, that you've really don't have to wonder what's crossing the border. You've actually got advanced information, and I believe that you are aware of that. Customs is important. We need to focus on that, but we have turned the corner, I do believe, and I want to commend all the customs staff, Judge, who sit in areas and conditions that are unacceptable and difficult. I mean, some of the border posts are far from things that you and I would regard to be the things you'd like to have close to you. We need to remember that and just take cognizance of that. I come to certain recommendations to the Commission. And I'm going to read a little bit more because I want to be more specific here, Judge.
No, indeed.
We are at a historic milestone in our development. Although we are not proud of why we are here, we recognize that this is an opportunity to make amends and to ensure that these mistakes are not made again in future. And that is my prayer, that we will never see this again. We are mature enough to recognize that SARS's conduct has opened us up to criticism and censure, and we are humble enough to accept whatever corrective action our principles may recommend. In my view, if SARS leadership is mature, if SARS leadership has integrity and the required technical expertise, any governance model will work. However, we are not perfect, and we have to seek a more appropriate and robust practical governance framework that enables us to do our job, and as I've indicated earlier, that monitors us far more effectively. And no offense to the media, but we shouldn't be being monitored by the media or wait for the media to respond. We should have already dealt with these matters up front. I would like to request, Judge, the Commission to make recommendations on such a governance framework. Having listened to the evidence before this Commission, and especially on 31 August by Honourable Judge Dennis Davis, it is clear to me that it is essential to maintain SARS's autonomy. And knowing the Professor's view in his reports, he would concur with that, because that's what led to where we were. So we need to maintain SARS's autonomy with regards to the administration of tax and customs. It's important. SARS must have independence within the framework of tax policy that is determined by National Treasury. It needs to determine its own strategy, its own enterprise, its operational policies and processes, and to set its own budget, and to appoint and allocate its human resources. We need those abilities in order to take ourselves forward. The challenge for the Commission, Judge, is how to balance this autonomy with effective oversight. Some of the proposals that have been made include the appointment of a board or the setting up of a body such as the Inspectorate of Taxes and Customs. In my view, a board has challenges, and we did have a board in the early days of our organization. It is periodic, in other words, it only meets from time to time. It probably will not have dedicated resources allocated to it, unless that is part of the framework. It will not have the required infrastructure or permanency to act as a constant presence overseeing SARS, and that's what worries me about a board. Personally, I would prefer a body similar to the statutory Permanent Inspectorate of Tax and Customs that has the legal authority, the support...
Sorry, Judge, can you go a little slower?
Sure. Forgive me, Professor. No. Let me start that again.
No, don't worry, Norman's got it all down.
To reiterate...
Norman's better than me. Okay.
To reiterate...
And we will publish, we'll
Yeah.
publish your final version to Mr. Kingon.
Yeah. There are some changes I do need to make.
No, we'll make them, but in fact, we're going to put that on the website.
That's fine. Let me repeat that personally I would prefer a body similar to the statutory Permanent Inspectorate of Tax and Customs that has the legal authority and the supporting infrastructure, and very importantly, to access SARS confidential and taxpayer information in order to execute its performance monitoring role and impose itself on SARS when necessary. In this way, the integrity of taxpayer information can remain intact at all times. In addition to the traditional powers of oversight over the performance of SARS, such an inspectorate, and I'm changing my view of saying could to say it should, have the power to oversee internal investigations of staff. It could also have the power to act as a nominations committee for the appointment by the Minister of Finance of the Commissioner and Deputy Commissioners. In my view, the Inspectorate would report to the Minister of Finance. In the coming weeks, it is my intention that SARS will step up to the plate and do some research on the options that may be available in this regard, and I intend that we make some submission. I was getting somebody to start that process last night as to who can do it, to make submissions to you, Judge, and the Commission with regards to this proposal. It's important that we put this in place. We cannot be where we are today again. And I would appeal, Judge, if I may, that you consider this matter, and we will support your recommendations in this regard.
Mr. King, just let me, do you want to put all your recommendations and then come back to some?
That concludes my major recommendation. I'm going to conclude with some comments then in conclusion.
Now, just of the timing on that?
I intend to do the research very quickly, have that done very quickly. I don't know how long the inspect, because it requires a legislative mandate. That would probably only happen in the next year or two. I'm not sure when that will be.
Sorry, the timing of your submissions.
No, we will.
The judge asked me to do a chapter on this, and I want to get on with it.
Professor, I have not told the staff who may be watching online as we speak, but I'm telling them now that I'd like it in 2 weeks to the Commission.
Yeah, please, if you would, because, you know, we have to report, and I don't like delay myself. We're supposed to report finally to the President at the end of November. It's not long, and there's a huge amount
100%.
to report. So if you could just urge them on, we would like to see what you have to say on that.
I will do that, Judge. I'm putting them on the spot, but it is my intention. We want to support you in this process.
I just want to talk to you about that Inspector General, because I think that it's vital myself. They have one in America, they have one in Australia, I think I've read some of that. I would have thought that your Inspector General is here to as a backstop, as it were, for what happens internally. It's nothing to do with taxpayers.
Correct.
It's about internal things. He shouldn't be interfering with the Commissioner, but he should be a place that you can go to.
Correct.
If there are problems.
Correct.
And let me just, give me a moment.
Forgive me.
There are two questions that arise. Thirdly, it seems to me that Inspector General should have, as it were, the powers that this Commissioner has, to say, Mr. Kingon, I won't want this tomorrow. And Mr. Kingon has done so, even though he's been annoyed. And I want to look at the taxpayer affairs. And I want to summon someone if necessary, that they will come and talk to me. Do you have any difficulty with any of that?
Not at all. As long, in any framework that you put in, it's got to be in support of your management of your organization, not as a distraction of your management of your organization.
That's right.
And I think in terms of even, obviously things need to be reasonable in terms of the management. You can't be running at every second you've got to run the organization. Ultimately, whoever the commissioner may be has to run the organization. But he needs the power, as you've elaborated on them, he needs those powers, and we need to assist him in order to deliver on his mandate.
Yeah, hopefully the Commissioner would have nothing to do, the investigative director or whatever would have nothing to do, hopefully.
That would be the dream.
Yes. And as I say, I think it's very important that he doesn't interfere with management.
Correct.
He should be the last resort, as it were.
Correct.
But when he is called upon, he should have powers to act decisively.
Correct. And I liked your statement, because it's very important that we differentiate between the process of the tax ombud,
Yes.
which is service and taxpayer driven,
Yeah.
and what we are saying, the inspectorate being internally focused as to the SARS, the things that we want to be held accountable on. We're putting secrecy as a bar, for instance, today. That's what we want them to take ownership.
The other thing that arises, and maybe it's just something you want to look at in making your recommendation, to whom should the Inspector General be accountable? You see, I have difficulty. You said the Minister. Well, the Minister is a political appointment at the end of the day. Is it Parliament? I don't know. Will you think about that? Who controls the controller, as it were? Just think about
Let us give it some thought. My proposal, which I did put in my submission, is to the Minister of Finance. It could be to Parliament. I need to take a call on that. I'm not in a position to say one or the other. It needs to be accountable to somebody.
Correct.
And we need to determine who that somebody is.
While you're thinking about it, I think with respect, obviously, I've been thinking about this well. I don't think it's either or. On some matters that the Inspector General picks up, he would talk to the Minister. On other matters, if it involved the Minister as well, he would go to another avenue. But I don't think it's an either or, it's both.
Anyway, think about it.
We will consider that in the research that we do. Let's look at other jurisdictions. Let's not go reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
Ultimately, in my position as acting commissioner, and I believe whoever is the commissioner, we need to be accountable for our actions. And that is the fundamental aspect that needs to be addressed. The how we need to get to.
Exactly. What I have in mind is that the investigator, what do you call them?
Inspector General.
Inspector General is the ultimate whistleblower, as it were.
Yes.
Yeah.
And for me, he could be the one, for instance, the protected disclosure policy. He must administer that type of thing.
Yeah.
We need to put those checks and balances in place.
Anyway, give it some very serious
We will.
thought, if you will. Yes.
Judge, while he's doing that, can I raise another issue on governance? So what we're talking about is oversight. Now, the kind of oversight we've been talking about now is almost an integrity oversight. But then there's also a competence or an administration. The decisions that the Commissioner takes where the statute says in the discretion or the opinion of the Commissioner, on that's not an integrity. Do you think it's useful on that one to have a Deputy Commissioner who in certain matters would assist the Commissioner where he exercises a tax discretion?
Professor, I think I'd like to do some more research before I make a submission in that regard. There's various models that could work in that regard. I think it would be remiss of me to go further at this point in time without doing the proper research.
Well, I think that if I may just follow up on that, you've mentioned a board, and I have your reservations about a board as well. I don't think it can be of any great assistance. But the question does arise, ought there to be one or more deputy commissioners who, while having no power over the commissioner, at least are there as, number one, support of the commissioner, and the other one is push back against the commissioner if he's making the wrong decisions.
Correct. And
Will you think about that? It's whether there should be that level.
the pushback that needs to happen in that management structure needs to be able to happen with absolute integrity, without any risk of a person being sidelined
Yes.
or pushed out.
Well, that's where the Inspector General comes into it.
Correct.
But the question I'm asking, and I think the Professor's also interested in, and I'm sure my colleagues, do you have a level of deputy directors, one or more, as been suggested, or isn't that just an unnecessary step before your EXCO? In other words, EXCO should be performing that role.
There's various models there, Judge, and I think for me to comment what would be the best approach, I really would prefer not to at this point in time.
All I'm doing at the moment is raising things I'd like you to think about. I'm not looking for answers. I'm just giving some suggestions of what you should look at.
Correct.
And the other thing that comes from that, should there be a formal EXCO? In other words, not one you can disband overnight.
And those are the issues. Ultimately, the EXCO is an advisory body to the Commissioner.
Yes.
It has no statutory form as such. The accounting officer is the Commissioner, full
Yes.
stop.
Yeah, exactly.
Whether it needs something beyond that, I'm going to give it some thought, and we're going to do some research. So the areas that we're going to look at is the structures with regards to that top structure. What is good practice? Because the OECD, I think, even has got some details on this, which we could probably go and pull out and see what is best practice.
Okay.
And then the Inspectorate General of Taxes and Customs, we need to do some research.
Just to be clear on that, I would like you to, in due course, give us your view on whether a formalized EXCO would have, number one, greater accountability because it is a formalized body, and number two, greater confidence to be able to deal with the Commissioner and make sure that you're on the right track.
Sorry, Judge, there's two more things that he thinks about. Is a Deputy Commissioner good from a succession point of view? Something happens to a Commissioner, unfortunate death, illness. Is that a good idea that you have a deputy who would fill in forthwith? No answer now.
Yeah.
And secondly, in your governance thinking, what decisions should the Commissioner have to get from an administrative point of view, the Minister's concurrence? For example, bonuses, salaries, that kind of thing, expenditure, etc.
100%. I take note of those.
Mbongi, do you want to raise any other governance things? Anyway, we'll hear from you hopefully soon.
Mr. Kingon, before you begin with your concluding remarks, I just have a final question for you. SARS spent just shy of 400 million rand on Bain and Gartner. Now, Bain have said in the media that there's some form of offer to pay back the money that was spent on them. They've also said that they will wait for this commission to make a recommendation in that regard. And my question to you is, If the Commission recommends that all the money is paid back to SARS, what would you do with it?
I will invest in my IT infrastructure as a starting point. I would like to invest in terms of my empowering of my staff through training, for proper training happening. There are certain key areas that we need to look at. If we got all of that money tomorrow, I'm not going to waste it. We've got to refresh. We've got to fix and redo the e-filing platform to be totally user-friendly. My dream is that I don't have clients in the branch. I don't want tax practitioners coming into a branch. If I can give them a self-service option for end-to-end, it takes a huge burden off my staff. Ultimately, I'd like to get self-service options as being the principle, just like ATMs became for the banks, took the people away from the tellers and online banking. That's what I'm wanting to do. So I would like to invest into that aspect. I need to look at consolidating buildings. For instance, we're wasting with multiple buildings. There's staff, I mentioned earlier, I've got custom staff living in conditions that are not ideal. We need to fix those things. Now, I've got to look at which is the priority, obviously. But IT infrastructure for me, and we've seen it this week, there's some critical things we have to do there to make sure that we take the organization forward in that regard. What I want to assure you, I'm not going to go put down a new carpet, I'm just being facetious here, but tomorrow, when I get the money. We're going to invest it in things that serve our clients better, and that's what I'll do.
I want to just make one thing very clear. You say what you'd like to do. I think we're talking in a bit of a vacuum here. Yeah. Number one, I read a press release from Bain. No one has asked this commission to make any decision about anything. And we will not be making a decision about what should happen to money that we haven't been asked to make. I don't know if the money is available or not. We spoke to Mr. Min there. I'm still unclear as to what Bain has in mind. But we have been not asked to do anything, so don't spend the money just yet if you don't mind.
No.
And we're not going to make any recommendations at all about what they should do with money if they haven't offered to do anything with money.
Maybe, Judge, to emphasize, everything's got to be done with prudence and in the form of governance. I don't spend money I don't have, obviously.
No, that was said lightly. We don't have to discuss it. I just want to make sure we all understand this Commission has not been offered any opportunity to do anything. And until it happens, we won't. And I don't believe that until I hear Bain saying anything about this, well, I don't believe that the money is available.
But this is a matter inherently between SARS and Bain, and SARS and Gardner. Yeah. If people have let you down or people have caused harm, it's a civil matter.
Well, I'll tell you now that if a letter came tomorrow and said, make a recommendation, I'll say, pay it back to where you got it from.
Judge, if I may comment, if you don't mind on this matter. I've been shocked by what I heard in evidence with regards to both these contracts. Shocked with regards to pre-discussions, shocked with regards to using outside people who ultimately benefit to prepare frameworks for how the work should be done. To the extent, look, it's just unacceptable. It's not the behavior that we want to it's not good governance, and we cannot allow that to happen. The Chief Officer of Finance has already engaged with Bain, and we've had engagements. I think he's alluded to that. I'll be honest with you, Judge, I wasn't clear from the press releases that I heard as to what was going on. I have not been clear, and I haven't been clear subsequent. We have also asked for an engagement with Gardner, which engagement will happen in due course. But that's work in progress, and I concur with Professor Katz that is a matter between me as the accounting officer and those respective firms, and I intend to deal with that. But if the money is to come back, it's got to come back to SARS, and I will utilize it for the best of the benefit of our taxpayers ultimately.
Thank you. Do you want to go on?
Yes. Thank you. I'm close to finish, Judge.
No, it's very interesting, I assure you, everything you're saying, so don't feel that you're taking up our time.
No. Judge, you did give me till 1, but
Advocate Steinberg did, by the way, not me.
This has been an extremely challenging time for me. I didn't think prior to the 19th of March that I would be sitting here today testifying before you. It's been hugely busy. But there's one thing, and it's a question I'm not going to answer. You obviously got a lot of introspection. And the key question that I believe both myself and my colleagues must be asking ourselves is, why did we not stop this destruction? And it's a question I'm not going to answer, Judge. But it is a question that I've been asking myself repeatedly. Should I have had more courage? Should I have taken a firmer stand? Would I have been without a job? I'll be honest, I would. You had that fear. But it's a question I think each of my colleagues, whether on EXCO, whether it be within my group executive structure, whether it be in any other area within our organization, all areas, we need to ask that question, could I have done more? Because the success of the organization is built upon what we do. And it's a scary question. One that keeps me awake. But we must not be paralyzed by guilt or self-doubt. The time is to move on. We have a higher duty. We actually don't have a choice. We must rebuild this organization. Before closing, I wish to send a message to each and every one of my colleagues in SARS. Since I've been acting commissioner, I see your hardships. I see the challenges that you have in a very different light. I've learned a lot. I've never thought there was so much out there. Across the board, I see the loss of pride, which I've shared, that we all used to have in working for SARS. I used to walk, and I'm involved in my community extensively, with my head held high. It's a battle. I want that to be restored. Joy, we're going to do it together. I also see the vast potential and commitment to do the right thing and realize that all is not lost. Together, we can rebuild SARS, once again to be a proud organization, seeking to serve our clients to the best of our abilities. I've been extremely heartened to hear a number of former and retired SARS employees and people who've left our organization. I'm going to call them the SARS alumni, and there's many of them, who have contacted me because they subscribe to the higher purpose. They want to offer their skills and services to SARS, interestingly, not for position, but to rebuild the organization. I welcome that. How that would happen, I don't know. It's, those are things we've got to think about. But it was just wonderful for me to see people so passionate about a brand that I'm prepared to say, hey, I want to come back and start building this wall again that needs to be rebuilt. I also want to appeal to the nation as a whole. To support us in the process, a very difficult process, a difficult time in our history of our country and our organization. I appeal to them to be good fiscal citizens, and there are many who are not, but many are, and many people are seeking to do the right thing. But I want to appeal to the people to be good fiscal citizens, to work with us so that we can begin a process of rebuilding SARS and restoring trust in this vital institution. It is critical, and I'm appealing to every single person, whether it is a person paying excise duties, only pay as you earn, from salaries to the big vendors that are out there, Join us in the process. We are prepared to engage. We're prepared to listen to you. We're prepared to work with you to rebuild. As long as you're behaving yourself, I'm happy to work with you. But please help us rebuild this organization. I've got a small line to end with, but before I do, it would be remiss of me not to thank you, Judge. You look surprised, Judge.
Well, it's the first compliment I've had for the last 6 months.
Judge, Professor Katz, Mr. Kahle, Advocate Masilo, your time is important to us. That you're investing into this, it's a pleasure. And we welcome it as an organization, and I think I would be speaking on behalf of the country. We welcome it as the country. And I want to thank you for the spirit in which we could engage with you, the spirit of constructive, forward-looking engagements that I've had. It is wonderful. Yes, we've shed tears, but ultimately we've been looking to the future of a better organization. And Judge, from my first engagement till today, that has been what you've said. And we appreciate that. And we will continue to work with you and support you to the best of our ability. We may fail sometimes. You say we're not quick enough or something. It has been sometimes a pain, but it is good. And we need to welcome everything that is good. I would like to convey to the evidence leaders the spirit in which the engagements have happened with staff has been superb. And we want to thank you. You're part of the healing process of this organization, and we welcome that. I've got a team of people who've been working as liars, and I do want to thank them, as you did, Judge, earlier. Good people who've been doing their best to try and help in this process. A process we didn't know what we were entering into, but I did want to just say that publicly. Our appreciation to you, Judge. Thank you. I would like to conclude with a simple line, that SARS has not seen its best yet. Thank you very much, Judge.
Thank you.
You know, Mr. Kingon, I want to just exchange a few things with you. But first, let me let you down. You're talking about an unreal world. You've talked about the past, talked about the future, you haven't talked about the present. You're not the commissioner.
I'm not.
And there is a commissioner.
Correct.
So you're talking about, I think they talk about a virtual world. I don't know about Now, what is concerning me, and it does concern me, and this is not said lightly at all, a lot of what I've heard you talking about was what I heard in evidence existed in the beginning of 2014. And you had a situation, it was changed radically. You're talking about perhaps not as quick change, but going back there. And you're getting a seesaw here. Now, so what happens with all this stuff you're going to do? I mean, you've got 60 days, as I said. No, I mean, that's a bit light, but what's going to happen? You're going to put it all back, and then what? It's going to be dismantled again. Are we going to go on with the seesaw? So that's a matter of just give me a moment. I gave you until 1, give me half a minute. It concerns me, and I you know, there are court proceedings at the moment in which it is, you know, said perhaps rightly, perhaps wrongly, I don't know, that this is an unlawful commission. Now, I've looked at those allegations and I've said I'm perfectly happy it's lawful, but one may be wrong. Maybe it has all been unlawful. So it gets set aside. Where do we go from there? So I am a bit concerned about the present. Now, it's not for me to decide those things. It's for the President to decide. It's for the Constitutional Court to decide where all this has been going, etc. But I'm almost tempted to say, please don't put those things in place at the moment, because you will have more disruption. You'll put it in place, you'll come back, it'll all be dismantled again. So it's a bit of a quandary. Now, you know, I'm not going to talk about the Constitutional Court and what it'll do. that's its job, and I'm not going to prejudge anything they do. We've still got to go through that process. But quite seriously, should you be putting these things in place if they're just going to be dismantled again? It's a serious question. You've spoken about a great vision, etc. Well, you can only have that vision if the person in charge has got that vision. And with respect, you're not in charge yet. So what does one do? Do you have any suggestions?
Judge, maybe you're going to the heart of the issue. This organization needs certainty, and it needs to resolve this matter urgently with regards to the Commissioner and the Commissioner's position, because it is in so doing that we can get final stability. Yes, I am acting, but I do have every authority, and I'm going to act at the moment in the way that I believe fit for our country's sake and for our organization's sake. Yes, I am acting. I've had, this is my third 90-day cycle, as you've stated, and I'm in that 90-day cycle. But the Minister and the Deputy Minister have confirmed I've got full authority to do what I need to do to make a success. And I want to repeat, and I might be paraphrasing what the Minister said on Tuesday in Parliament, we cannot afford a mess at SARS as a country. We cannot. And we are in a very difficult position. We're needing certainty. The matter of the Commissioner needs to be wrapped up extremely urgently. It cannot delay, but I have to proceed. I can't sit on my laurels, Judge. I understand what you're saying about the seesaw, that a Commissioner will come in and maybe have a totally different vision and a totally different view of what I've expressed here today. I am basing my decision on my engagements with my staff and colleagues that this is the right approach for us. It's also based on what's best practice. And we believe that there is no other alternative. Yes, there might be tweaks here and there, but there is no other alternative. To go back to where we were would be a disaster. And I believe even in and I'll be the last person to blow my horn because I'm not about that. The fact of the matter is we cannot afford to go back to where we were, and I think I've done a bit to try and bring back from the brink where we were in March of this year. And I will continue to do that. But I also want to say categorically, publicly here, whoever is the Commissioner, I will support that person. I would go all out to make sure that SARS is a success.
Well, I will just caution you about that. You've got a Commissioner. If you want to say you're going to support the Commissioner, make sure you include the current Commissioner. Anyway, I just caution you about saying
No, I understand
I will
that, Judge.
support any Commissioner. Anyway. But let me go to another thing. As I say, that concerns me a bit, but that's not in my hands. The President has got lots of difficult decisions at the moment that he's making, I'm sure. This is one he'll have to make. He'll make it as he sees best, and it's not my business. Apparently there are court proceedings. We'll get on with that in the normal course, and I accept any decision a court will make, obviously. I don't think courts can change the facts myself, but there it is. There's another thing I just want to say as well, that I've made one or two notes here. When this commission started, I had the pleasure to spend a Saturday morning with you. You recall your wife makes very good shortbread, and thank her again. But I knew nothing about SARS at all, and that's why I saw you, and you gave me some briefing on it, and thank you very much. It was very useful. In fact, the discussions before this commission settled formally were extremely important, because otherwise how do you know which direction to take? But since then, you knew about the inside. Since then, I've heard so much evidence, and you fortify me in the conclusions I've reached on the evidence, because I was the outsider listening to what people say, and I was listening to what you say as the insider looking in. And quite frankly, the two coincide very closely. I'm very gratified that perhaps we're on the right track. So I found that interesting. As far as your a lot of what you said in detail, it's about management issues, which are not, we're not here to manage SARS, as it were. So I'm not sure that we would make recommendations on a lot of the things you've talked about. Those are your issues, and I'm very gratified to hear of the things you're going to do, because it seemed to me, from an outsider's point of view, all of them needed looking at. But our terms of reference are not how to manage the process, how to govern it. And that's what we'll be looking at. So I think it's very important that you give us that memorandum. And then there are a lot of individual issues we've got to make findings on. As I look at them now, quite frankly, I think that some of them are rather trivial in comparison to what we've heard. But thank you very much for that. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kingon.
Thank you very much.
Is that it for the day?
Yes, we're back on Monday at 9 a.m.
We've got, let me just say once and final time, everything in life comes to an end, including a commission. And you know, I used to sit in the courts and I thought to myself, you know, if someone had a litigation in front of me and I had to wait forever to see if anyone's going to say anything, well, none of the litigation would ever have been completed. There comes a time when you say, enough's enough. We've got 2 days left, Monday and Tuesday, is that right? And then I'm getting on with the work of writing a report. If anyone wants to say anything, they better go forward very quickly.
And Judge, there will be a couple more days in early November.
Well, there may be. Yeah. Thank you.
We're not coming back in November, are we?
We are. We're going to put our recommendations.
Yeah, doesn't look like it wants to.
I've had a running. So this morning when he fetched me, I said, I think